Good morning and welcome to the 29th meeting of the Education, Children and Young People Committee in 2024. I'd like to welcome Jackie Dunbar, who's joining us this morning, replacing our previous colleague Stephanie Callaghan. And on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank Stephanie for her work while she was a member during this session. Our first item today is to choose a new deputy convener. The Parliament has agreed that only members of the Scottish National Party are eligible for nomination as deputy convener of this committee, and I understand that Jackie Dunbar is the Scottish National Party's nominee. Do we agree to the nomination of Jackie Dunbar? We do. That is agreed. Congratulations, Jackie, and welcome to your new role as Deputy Convener. And can I also take this opportunity to thank Evelyn Tweed for everything she has done as Deputy Convener of the committee, and it's great that you're continuing with us on the Education, Children and Young People Committee. We now move to Agenda Item 2. This is an evidence session on the Schools Residential Outdoor Education Scotland Bill at Stage 1. This is a Members' Bill that's been brought forward by Liz Smith, MSP, and today we hear from two panels of witnesses. Could I welcome our first panel, Andrew Bradshaw, Wider Achievement Manager, Outdoor Learning and Adventure Education, City of Edinburgh Council, also representing the Scottish Advisory Panel for Outdoor Education, and Matthew is joining us Andrew's joining us virtually today. Matthew Sweeney, who's the Policy Manager for Children and Young People at COSLA, and Tara Lillis, who is a Policy Official at the NASUWT. Welcome to you all. We have an awful lot of questions to get through. Some of the members may direct their questions to individual witnesses. Otherwise, if you hear something that you were going to say, there's no need to repeat it because we will have to rattle through things given we've got two panels today. Could I first of all start by asking you all, but maybe Matthew first, from a COSLA point of view, can you give us an overview of the current provision of outdoor residential education across Scotland and the variances that you see within your 32 local authorities across the country?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to give evidence. So I think at the moment what we'd say is there's quite a wide range of activity which exists at the moment in terms of outdoor learning in the round. So I think recently, and what we pointed to in our evidence was a document from a few years ago from Education Scotland, which pointed out a range of practices ongoing, some of that being residential, but some of it being what we've done to try and engage outdoor learning as part of the sort of day-to-day life within schools and early learning and childcare centres for that matter. What we, I think, have seen is that there's a number of places where schools make decisions to undertake outdoor residential trips with children and young people, but we've also got a range of work that's ongoing. And as COSLA, we're supporting the Learning for Sustainability Action Plan, which we've agreed jointly sort of with the Scottish Government and a range of other stakeholders, which includes a wide range of commitments around sustainability in the round, but including on outdoor learning. And more recently, we've joined a working group that's been established by the Scottish Government to look at outdoor learning and make recommendations over the coming months, essentially. I think the other thing we'd want to flag is that there has been areas, I think, particularly where there's been the ability for investment, where I think we've gone further, particularly in that engaging outdoor learning in the day-to-day. So I think if you look at the early learning and childcare expansion, particularly where there was the ability to invest in sort of new services, there's a lot more sort of what we'd call indoor-outdoor settings where there's that ability for children and young children to come in and out. And similarly, there's been outdoor classrooms and some of the sort of newer skills that we've been able to sort of resource in the meantime. And lastly, I suppose the other thing I'd flag is around the fact that just the structure of the curriculum for excellence is around that sort of ability for local authorities, but also particularly for schools to be able to structure their curriculums to meet the needs of the children and young people that they're supporting. And I think that will obviously mean that there will be different approaches taken, both in terms of their sort of day-to-day outdoor learning, but perhaps also with their the sort of residential approaches they take as well.
And the bill as it's drafted at the moment, how are your member councils and also within councils? Because some authorities, you know, we've got large geographical authorities such as Highland Council, for example, that may take different approaches in the north of the region to the south of the region.
So I think in terms of the bill itself, our position, I think, is being really clear that we support the principle of outdoor learning, particularly in that kind of broad sense. I suppose at the moment, I think we've got a number of concerns, I suppose, around the new duties being placed on local authorities, and I suppose the practicality of being able to meet them, I think, in sort of the short term, particularly around, I think, questions around staffing, around capacity, and also around, I think, you know, how do we create the right offers for children and young people? And I think, you know, probably not surprising in terms of a COSLA view, but really concerned about that funding being available to meet that, because there's quite significant financial, you know, costs with it, with a lot of this, particularly those around staffing, those around transport, and sort of the centres themselves.
I think we'll come on to all of those issues with the committee members having questions. Andrew, is there anything you want to say about the overall provision at the moment and what the bill could achieve going forward?
Morning, committee. Yes, I mean, research that we've done via SAPO across Scotland, we did find, and I can confirm that that range of uptake by schools. So we looked at a sample of local authorities, and on average in the primary sector, that was about 61% of primary schools going on a residential. Higher for secondary schools onto outdoor learning centres, and much higher for any kind of residential as well. So that very much sort of confirms that picture. From an Edinburgh's point of view and SAPO's, we very much support the bill based on the information so far, broadly speaking. We think it's really important that appropriate residentials are seen as part of Scotland's approach to outdoor learning and learning for sustainability, and really clear about that. And also the focus on residentials being integral to the curriculum. But I think I really want to stress the importance of that flexibility and autonomy for local authorities, for schools, and both Edinburgh and SAPO believe in that approach will allow different local authorities and schools and within local authorities to consider that context and the needs. But we also acknowledge that there are important caveats as well, which we'll undoubtedly get onto: the cost, the funding. I think also about the negative impact on other areas of outdoor learning as well, and I think contracts already mentioned, and also that capacity of high quality is really important. But we also feel that can be overcome. This process will allow us to discuss that, and that's really good. And I think, just if I may, just finish by saying there's a lot of excitement about this in our sector, and I think that's really important. It's really useful. It's brought residentials to the forefront in terms of debate, discussion. Where are we? What's the trends? What's going to go to the future? What is a good residential? How do they fit into the broader learning for sustainability? So for us, that's really exciting and that's really interesting. And this dialogue and debate's very helpful.
So just briefly on your point about the negative impacts on the current provision, what would you say they are?
I think the concern may be that if the funding model isn't right, and the resourcing around that is that could undue on other forms, and we very much think about the progressive nature is residentials are complementary. We've heard research and we see those different benefits around that. So it's really important, and that's the benefit of a national bill and the framework around that, because it safeguards and encourages that. So I think that's really important. So I think that's mitigated by the bill. I think that's really important as long as the guidance in the bill is right. But that would be our sort of opening concern.
Thank you. Tara, is there anything you want to add at this point?
I suppose we would, in addition to that, welcome the opportunity to discuss the unequal impact on various communities. It has been raised through our own structures. Initially, members of our Equality Advisory Group raising concerns that their communities and people within their communities were entering into debt in order to secure their child being able to access a residential opportunity, and the substantial cost associated with that for individual families. And I think it's welcome, the discussion, because it casts a very clear light on that inequality within the system, which isn't particular to residential outdoor experiences. But I think it's important that we look at this through an equality lens and through a socio-economic lens, so that education can indeed be free at source, and that there is equal provision for all children and young people.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to Pam Duncan-Glancy now. Andrew, if you do want to come in to respond to any points, just put your hand up and we'll try and catch you that way. Pam.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Just to pick up on the point that you've made, Tara Lewis, on inequity in the system, I just wanted to ask the panel's view whether they think there is inequity in the current system.
I mean, if I may, thank you. There absolutely is. I think if we consider outdoor residential education as one facet within learning for sustainability and outdoor learning more broadly, it's difficult to pull it apart from other experiences within the curriculum. So, for example, trips and outdoor learning experiences. So when we've been engaging with our members, it has been around that broader package of learning experiences rather than specifically around residential learning. But in our recent cost of the living survey, we had 93% of teacher respondents saying that they saw a benefit to school trips for children and young people. But at the same time, the information and evidence coming through from that survey of members showed that there were significant barriers in order to be able to access outdoor learning broadly, as well as school trips and as well as residential outdoor education. And that covers more than one heading. So, for example, respondents from an ESN setting said that it was unattainable for them in order to access a residential outdoor centre because of the cost. The cost was prohibitive. Others said that even where they had put money in themselves in order to supplement school budgets, they were still having to leave some children and young people behind because of the budgetary costs on schools and local authorities, but also the impact on individual families. In addition to that, I think we would look more broadly at impacts that, say, historically, when we talk about outdoor learning and we talk about outdoor sports, there are barriers aligned with the equality duties, so for women, for people with disabilities, and also around Black minority ethnic communities, historically around racist and systemic barriers in order to participate. So when we look closely, there are multiple barriers which face children, young people, schools and teachers in order to provide outdoor learning.
And what do you think your members, how is it affecting your members? How are those barriers affecting your members currently?
I think at the moment education is hanging on a shiggly peg. So we are largely reliant upon the unpaid work and labour and the goodwill of the education workforce in order to maintain existing provision. What the impact of that is that our members are ground down, they are exhausted, they are I suppose, absolutely pulled as thin as they possibly could be in order to provide day-to-day education within the classroom. And when we're looking at this more broadly, any additionality in terms of going out and about, trips, outdoor learning, there will necessity be additionality for transport costs, for additional staffing. So at the moment, I think it's quite bleak on the ground. And I think while there is fundamental agreement with the principle of equity and with the principle of ensuring that all children are able to access the same entitlements, I think staff on the ground probably feel that they would rather they had additional support assistance within the classroom, they would rather they had enough teachers on the ground, they would rather they had external support agencies able to assist them with the young people before we were focusing on outdoor residential provision.
Thank you. Matthew Sweeney, can I ask about your members and what their view in terms of the inequity is and the impact it has?
I think I'd agree broadly with a lot of what Tara Lillis has set out there. I suppose what I would say is I think that local authorities do, and schools as well, I think take a lot of approaches in terms of using the funding they do have available to them to try and lessen that, particularly I think when it comes to the sort of the impact of poverty and inequality. I think if you look at the work that's gone on through the cost of the school day work, where there's a number of schools who are taking really innovative approaches, not just across school trips, but across a range of non-uniform days, school uniforms. There's been a lot of really good work, I think, that's gone on across the country, across the recent times. I suppose the challenge is I think we're obviously seeing a really challenging time for our communities at the moment, and I think one of the big things that I think COSLA consistently highlight, I suppose, are some of the real challenges of trying to sort of make do with kind of the funding we have when the need is growing all the time. So that's not just growing, I think, in terms of the sort of those poverty and inequality aspects, but also I think of obviously the increase in additional support needs. and more broadly, I suppose, equality is concerned. So I think that for us, it's very challenging to continue to try and meet all of those needs and do it at the same time. I think for this bill in particular, we're quite interested to understand about sort of how those additional costs will be met. I think obviously some of that's set in the financial memorandum, but in terms of those things around, you know, the clothing, sleeping bags, all those kind of things, who's going to meet some of those costs? Because again, I think at the moment, as kind of Tara set out, there's not a huge amount of capacity in budgets of schools to meet some of them. So how would some of those be met? And similarly, I think particularly for sort of children and young people with the most severe additional support needs, do we have the right type of provision available, both in terms of, you know, sort of domestic accommodation, but also in terms of the activities that might be taking place in some of this? And how would that need to be rethought and understood?
Thank you. I don't know if I'm not sure if Andrew Bradshaw had wanted to come in. Thank you.
Yes, that's good. Thank you. From a SAPO perspective, yes, there are a range of barriers potential, but there's also lots of good practice where local authorities and schools are addressing those barriers. But it is challenging. There is the capacity to do that, and I think it's really important around that equity around financial barriers, but also non-financial barriers too. And we see lots of good practice, and I think the bill and subsequent guidance, if right, can really support other local authorities working together to share good practice and to share those ideas, and I think that's really important. From an Edinburgh point of view, we absolutely recognise the potential for inequality and inequity, and that's why we work really hard around that. You know, we measure how many children attend residentials to our Benmore and Lagan centres, and so not all residentials. We try and understand how they're funded. We also try and understand of the children and the young people who don't attend, why that is as well, and that can be a range of non-financial factors in particular. I think it's fair to say that there's a range of funding models used by schools, and again, that flexibility and autonomy to do that is really good. But the key point here is the capacity to do that. That takes significant time from schools. They do a great job across Scotland, really good examples, but that capacity to do that then takes it away from other things. So this bill would really facilitate that and support that if funded appropriately and not to the detriment of other really impactful programmes as well. So just to sum up, yes, there are a range of barriers, really good example around that. This bill provides an opportunity to do that. But the capacity is really important to look at the non-financial elements too.
Thank you. I just have one other question if there's time. Thanks, Convener. On the point about pupils with ASN, what's happening now to support them, and will the bill help that, make it more difficult? Is there anything about the bill that should change to support it?
I would say that the unintended consequences of the bill are the shifting of finances away from basic provision. And while learning for sustainability and outdoor learning should be a thread that weaves its way throughout the curriculum, nevertheless, there are some basics which require to be in place in order to have a successful education and learning environment. At the moment, in some local authorities and some schools, we're talking about 50% of learners with an additional support need. I think, to an extent, the bill has been framed in a way that that doesn't accommodate those additional support needs, and that can vary from increased anxiety. As post-pandemic, we're seeing a lot of that within classrooms, impacts on mental health and well-being of children and young people. That could be in terms of physical access. That could be in terms of a whole host of behavioural issues in addition. And I don't think the bill, certainly within the financial memorandum, sets out a mechanism through which children with additional support needs would be able to access the proposed outdoor residential provision without a substantial injection of cash more than is proposed. And further, there are potential knock-on consequences about funding more broadly within education being diverted. And at the moment, one of the key priorities is about ensuring support for additional support needs. So there are risks.
And then Matthew, if that's okay.
Yes, I think inclusion in mainstream schools, in particular, a lot of work is done in terms of around that. But I think unpicking in the bill, but also the guidance how needs are met, and that's really important. I think some of those things can be addressed through training for schools and for staff as well to get that best practice, but also looking at the funding model. I think I agree, access to the right facilities, the right equipment is really important, and is that pooled across Scotland, so we make good use of resources, and also the option of specialist hubs for special schools as well, and how that works. It's really important. There's some really good examples across the UK of specialist providers and how that's established too. So I think, yes, definitely some more interest in inclusion and some more detail, particularly in the guidance, would absolutely be helpful.
Matthew.
I agree with everything colleagues have said. I suppose the only other thing I'd add is that obviously there's a range of work ongoing at the moment. Just last week, the Scottish Government and COSLA published our update on the ASL action plan that came on the back of Angela Morgan's report, and I think that shows the range of work that's ongoing at the same time. I think, however, though, I don't think anyone would be sort of denying, I think, some of the broader trends we're seeing in terms of additional support needs. I think, as Tara said, that's really diverse in terms of what that means, but I think we are seeing that level of growing need. So I think there's a lot of work ongoing, but I think we recognise there's still a lot to do, was kind of the sort of the phrasing we were talking about in terms of when that was launched last week as well.
Okay, thank you. Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Convener. It's been really interesting what the panel's got to say, and in terms of value of residential outdoor education to pupils, to schools and to local authorities, to the councils. So what level of governance should decisions about residential trips be taken? Who should make the decision that a trip and education in that manner is going to be taken, and why do you think this should be the case, please?
Yeah, happy to kick off. So I think it's got to be a sort of about collaboration between sort of schools and local authorities in terms of those decisions. I think obviously there's probably elements where you need a bit of support between both. So obviously some things around risk assessment, some things around sort of transport organisation can often be done at sort of that local authority level. That may change depending on the size of the school and sort of some of the size of the local authority as well. So there's some, I think, elements about that decision kind of there being that collaboration. But I suppose in terms of decision making around the curriculum, I think Curriculum for Excellence is quite clear that there's that sort of autonomy for schools, for head teachers, for individual teachers to make some of those decisions in terms of what they want to do. So we think probably the balance at the moment where there is that kind of key role for individual schools and sort of working with the local authority would be really key in terms of that sort of where that decision should continue to lie.
Okay, thank you. And Tara, do you think teachers should have an input to this sort of aspect?
Indeed, and I rather think the elephant in the room is the contractual position of teachers who are at the moment providing residential outdoor education on a goodwill basis. There's no foundational contractual obligation on them to do so. And indeed, I'd go further than that to say that the trade union's advice to our members is to not participate because of the significant personal and professional risks that are associated where a trip is not contractual, where it may not have clear educational outcomes, and where it doesn't require the expertise of teachers in terms of their professional learning and their skills. And I think sitting underneath the proposal and reading through a number of the submissions is a presumption that the outdoor provision would be undertaken by classroom teachers. I don't necessarily think that has to be the case. I think if it were mandated that it were teachers, that would cause significant difficulties with the national bargaining structure at the SNCT, which is tripartite between COSLA, the trade unions and the Scottish Government. And I think for any government to deviate from the national bargaining structure would be a very serious step indeed. I wouldn't anticipate that. I think it is possible that this can take place with centralised resources from local authorities without necessitating teachers undertaking the work. Much like our young people, teachers themselves have a diverse range of needs who are for caring responsibilities, perhaps in terms of their own health and well-being, physically are not able to dedicate that additional time gratis. nor should they, because it isn't a contractual requirement on them to do so. So I think there are ways around that in terms of additional resourcing within local authorities in order to support such work. But I would expect teachers to have a core role because they are leaders of learning, as Matthew rightly set out. So in terms of the curriculum and in terms of the pedagogy and in terms of embedding this so it isn't dropped as a trip or an outdoor learning experience, so that it's woven throughout the curriculum, teachers have a key role, but I wouldn't say that they necessarily have a key role in terms of physical attendance.
All right, thank you. Can I just ask on the back of that then, I mean, I can see what you're suggesting, but are you suggesting also that there may be that some teachers would be keen, or would there have to be a separate number of people who worked specifically on this manner of education rather than the normal schools?
I mean, fundamentally, any of those discussions would be substantial contractual changes for teachers, and that would need to go through the national bargaining structure. And I suppose for the committee's knowledge and understanding, thinking about our own position and the position of others that have been publicly stated within the consultation response, I think it's unlikely to garner support from the trade unions to have an additional contractual requirement for overnight stays.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, that's useful to put into the discussion that we're having. Thank you very much, Tara. And Andrew Bradshaw. Andrew, what's SAPO's position on this element, please?
In terms of value, very much what's already been said about autonomy and flexibility. So that's within the local authorities and the schools, and I think that's really important. Work's already started on a national quality, residential quality framework, and what we don't want is something that's prescriptive. It needs to allow schools to have ownership about that, some broad principles, but it also needs to embed the learner's ability to co-design quality, to evaluate that quality. And I think we have a big workforce, yes, voluntary and very enthusiastic, but lots of expertise. And it's really important about schools themselves understanding what is a good residential to their needs, to their context, and how they go and find the right provider. But also there may be around self-led. So we have some local authorities thinking about self-led options as well, where the workforce is keen to do that. So that built-in flexibility is really important. So all about value, that needs to recognise those local contexts. There is a quality insurance sort of framework being developed, and that's been in collaboration with schools, local authorities, providers, and colleagues in Education Scotland as well. So I think that's really positive, but that must provide that flexibility and autonomy to do that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we move to Ross Greer.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, all. My questions are primarily related to the impact on teachers in terms and conditions, and Tara, you've covered that quite comprehensively already, but if I could just clarify, is your position, NASWIC's position, that where the bill to be passed and this obligation to provide outdoor residential education be delivered in the typical way through teachers volunteering their time, that really that would have to end up going to SNCT as a formal discussion about changes to terms and conditions?
Absolutely, and I think for it to happen in that order, there would be significant discussions around the government's commitment to fair work by bypassing agreed bargaining machinery in order to impose changes to terms and conditions. As I said, depending on the wording of the bill, it is possible that that can be construed as not being identified to teachers to undertake that work. But looking broadly at the responses to date, it's clear that across multiple parties, the assumption has been made that teachers will continue to provide that for free. And I don't believe that that's a tenable position.
Thanks very much. And on that, you mentioned that it doesn't have to be provided by teachers in that typical manner that I think we would all be familiar with. So, Andrea, I'd be interested in any examples that you have or anything that you can add to this point in the discussion around what those alternative models look like. Are there areas of best practice that exist already here? Are there any local authorities that you're aware of from your own experience where the model is not typically reliant on teachers volunteering to go away with their class for the week?
Firstly, I'm very willing to go back to our membership and provide that to committee regarding that question. And I think that's really important because our membership want to provide that. In terms of, there are examples of more small-scale targeted residentials where we would often utilise a range of workforce staff around that, but the delivery model tends to be the school workforce in partnership with a provider, all self-led. And that can be quite diverse. Schools can often tap into volunteers, so we often see examples of volunteers, competent, well-trained volunteers who support the staffing structure, and also partners too. So we see lots of examples where the supervision and the delivery is supported by competent people from out with the schools, but also maybe within the school communities. But on a large scale, I think very much there is the delivery model on that school workforce, but I will go back to the membership just to check if there's any significant examples across Scotland where that may be the case, where that's being explored in terms of good practice.
Thanks very much.
I would just like to say also, it's about recognising the needs of the young people, isn't it? And if we're going to use different, it's about understanding the needs, the relationships. We know the benefits of residentials. A key part is around relationships and how that's developed. So any solution around that needs to think about and consider that very, very carefully. And that's why I think that autonomy and flexibility for schools and local authorities are important.
Thanks very much. That's very useful. The core questions around terms and conditions, I think Tara covered that really well in response to Bill Kidd, so no need for me to just repeat the same question.
OK, thanks. Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you. Good morning, panel. If the bill was passed today as it currently stands, what would the practical challenges be for you to implement the bill? You know, and if you had a magic wand, what changes would you make? I'm going to go to Matthew first, please.
Thank you. So I think there's a number of them. I think one of them, when we've just touched on it in quite some detail there, is around sort of staffing and how that would be worked out. I think, as kind of Tara pointed out, there's a process where we come to agreement through a tripartite agreement through the SNCT. I suppose, I think Tara's maybe pointed out that unions may have a position on that, but also I suppose anyway that would see that would likely see additional funding being required to meet that. So I think that's going to be a common theme, I suppose, this. Transport, the availability of transport and the funding for transport is going to be something that would be a big issue. I think that will also have a differential impact across authorities. I mean, obviously there's coach hire and stuff like that, and in terms of that we're already seeing sort of increasing prices and competition around that. But then I think if you some of our island authorities, they're going to have a whole range of different considerations again in terms of what they're going to have to consider and go around. I think there's questions that we still have around capacity, and I think around actually, do we have the number of centres that we would need at the moment to make sure that all children and young people are able to access as the bill is setting out. And even then, if we do have the capacity, do we have the capacity for the right times of year? Because obviously going to an outdoor centre in sort of May or August or September will be quite different from going in sort of January or February. And actually, if we don't sort of address some of those capacity points, then how are decisions made about which people get to go when? So I think there's an interesting question for us to think about there. And I think lastly, in terms of a very practical one, in terms of the fact that the age range sort of spans sort of primary and secondary school, how would we track which children and young people have had their entitled trip through this sort of process? So that could be if a sort of child changes school or changes that, how would that work? But also if, say, you've got a secondary school where there's different approaches within the sort of primary schools in that cluster. So some of them have done that in primary school, but then there's others who come to secondary school, and then there's a secondary school to take some, absolutely, move schools as well. So those sort of considerations. And then I suppose lastly, just to flag, there's probably fairly minor ones, but would be an issue for a small number. Composite classes, say you've got a P5-6 class, are half of the class going for a week, what do you do sort of with the rest? And similarly, I think about it in the sort of small number of schools we've got where there's maybe one teacher serving a really remote or rural community, how would you kind of manage some of those ones as well?
Okay. Tara, have you got anything to add to that?
I would fully support the points Matthew made about logistical challenges. I suppose what we've not touched upon today is the curricular framework. We, as yet, haven't seen entirely the vision for senior phase, which may or may not include personal pathways and project learning, and how this would then fit in would this fit in terms of that curricular vision. I think as it is, it would be fair to say that while we have had policy around learning for sustainability and outdoor learning, and that has embedded to an extent, it isn't as embedded as we might like. And I think a large part of that is around the time. So number of participants, the committee, have suggested that teachers require professional learning. And undoubtedly, access to professional learning is something that teachers desire. But in and of itself, it isn't sufficient. It needs to be accompanied by time. It needs to be accompanied by the opportunity to engage with colleagues and to discuss and to, have that collaboration and that time to be a leader of learning in your own context. So how this fits within a curricular framework, how this lands within learning for sustainability would also be another challenge to get our head around.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think it's really important. It's about that what, when and how, both at the school and at the local authority level. So I think that's already been touched on. That's really important. And retaining different types of residentials as well. To illustrate that fieldwork, for example, in the secondary sector, is the capacity still going to be there for that? So I think it's very much about making sure we protect existing good practice, and that's really important. That consultation with school communities, understanding how that fits into the curriculum. We want actually the residential to have maximum impact and to be embedded into the curriculum, and that doesn't happen overnight. So that takes time. It needs thought. It needs preparation. It needs to consider all of those aspects to make sure that investment really does benefit our young people. I think high quality capacity would certainly be a context. Is there enough capacity of high quality provision, whether that's by providers or self-led, which I've already touched on. I think staff confidence is really important as well, and I think that's really key to the capacity and supporting on that. And I think also maximising attendance. It's very quickly, if we were to jump into this tomorrow, it's about making sure that we work with our families, with our young people and our staff to make sure that our learners will attend with confidence, that they feel reassured and they understand the benefits. And again, that takes time. So I would really want that sort of preparation around that. And again, I think already touched on the importance of tracking participation so we don't lose young people. That's really important. But also, how do we measure the impact? If we're going to invest money, resources, in time and all of those other things, we want to be really clear about how we measure that. And there's lots of good ideas around that, and that quality improvement framework will certainly assist in that.
And I suppose tracking participation as well, then you've got the added problem to solve if a child couldn't or didn't choose to go the first time and then changes their mind afterwards. How do you then fit that child or young person in? Which isn't a question, it was just an observation. So okay. I'll pass back to you, Convener.
Thank you. John Mason.
Thanks very much, Convener. Mr Bradshaw, I think it was yourself, you said that approximately 61% of young people are currently going in residentials. Can you say anything about how that's paid for then? I mean, how many of them would be paid entirely by the family? How many would be paid entirely by the school or anything like that?
Yeah, so firstly, going back to that figure of 61% for primary schools, that's that element that we looked at. That does represent a range within that average as well. I think that's really important. And just my last point before I get onto that is, it's really important. It's not just how many schools attend; it's what percentage of the young people who attend from those schools who are going, and that's really important. And that's something SAPO wants to develop. Why they actually go and how they're funded and why not, we haven't sort of unpicked at a national scale. From an Edinburgh perspective, we do have that, so we do collect information around how people attend at Benmore and Lagan-Lear because we're very interested around that. So we have various figures around that, so I can give you a taste of that. For instance, so we have that attendance of between 85 and 90%. In terms of how many are subsidised and how schools work, is about 40% of the children who attend Benmore and Laganlear are subsidised in some way, and that some way is in a variety of forms. So PEF, through our research and our collection of data, is about 23%, 20 to 25%. Other school funding is about 14%. School fundraising, around 10%. I would add that some schools have fed back that they find fundraising a really important an opportunity for learners, as long as it's outside of their community, around building that into the education process, and we've seen some good examples of that. And from 10% from external grants. So there's a wide, diverse funding scale. This all takes time. It requires a lot of capacity by staff. I think it shows the commitment of staff and understand the benefits of taking young people away, and that's why they do it. But again, the advantage of this bill will provide consistency across Scotland and support that capacity. So that's certainly the model from Edinburgh. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that is helpful. If I can pursue it a little bit further. I mean, you said consistency, but consistency costs money. And if we've got parents who are well able to afford it at the moment, it would seem rather a shame to subsidise them with public money, and when that money could perhaps be targeted at the families who need it more. I mean, Willie Rennie's going to be asking questions about money later on, so I don't want to tread too much on his toes. But, I mean, I think £300 to £400 or thereabouts was suggested as the cost of a week. However, as some of the submissions, I think, said in 22-23 it was 400. So I'm assuming the average now would be up to about 460 with inflation. And I think on top of that, there'll be travel and equipment, clothing and equipment and so on. So, I mean, is your feeling that some families are not going, even if the 460 was covered, they wouldn't be able to go because of spending money, clothing, that kind of thing?
Yeah, we're definitely getting increasing information of increasingly concerned around the costs from a wide spectrum of parents, and that and how that's managed, and those hidden costs. Yes, we build in those solutions about clothing, etc. But transport is another thing that adds to the cost of a residential and the increase in the cost. So, yes, we definitely have information that parents do find that challenging, and there's no doubt about that. So I think the bill, in its current sense and how it would be maintained and operated, is certainly advantageous in that way.
Okay, maybe I could come to yourself, Mr Sweeney, on that kind of same theme. I mean, if the families and the schools are fundraising, and that's actually quite good for the schools and that young people enjoy that, if that money is already available, surely we shouldn't be replacing it with public money.
So I don't think that's something that we, of course, have taken a position on to date, but what I would perhaps highlight is that I suppose there is already an understanding that there are areas where we do provide specifically targeted funding to ensure that some children, young people can get access to. So I think if you look at stuff like the clothing grant, obviously is meant to sort of take a similar approach. Obviously there's the educational maintenance allowance. I think there's an understanding, and perhaps that there's more that I think that we collectively can do more to provide some of that targeted support, and that's got a place. I suppose that already is part of the sort of the ecosystem, I suppose, in terms of how we support children and young people to take advantage of their education. I think more broadly, I think I made the points earlier that this kind of agenda is really on the high priority within schools, and I think some of the examples I think perhaps Andrew went through, the use of PEF will perhaps be about them using PEF to make sure that where some parents are paying, that sort of those children who don't have that ability from sort of the families, maybe that's where the PEF is being used to kind of make up that gap. So that some of that may be going on at the moment.
Mm-hmm. I mean, presumably, you know, if there's a smaller number of poorer kids in a better off area, that can be covered by the school. But I mean, I've got schools in my area, they can't even come here to Parliament because they can't afford the bus. So, you know, what hope have they of getting a residential? So I suppose my question is, should we means testing for those that really need it, or should this be across the board, as I think the bill intends?
I think probably slightly difficultly. That's not something, a specific question we've taken to our members. The only thing I'd go back to is obviously that means testing element is there for things like educational maintenance allowance for free clothing grant. There's elements of that already exist, so it wouldn't be a totally foreign concept, I suppose.
Okay. Ms Lillis, we seem to have a lot of goodwill from teachers at the moment, and you're wanting to discourage them from doing that. As I understand it, they should only do what they're paid for. But, I mean, the costs of this is a challenge. Everybody accepts this is a good thing. But, if we're going to argue that every hour the teachers work on a residential, they have to be paid overtime, it's just not going to happen, is it?
I mean, I think the framing of the question ignores the fact that teachers are on average working 10 hours in excess per week of their already contracted duties. So they have a 35-hour contract, and our evidence from members, and you can triangulate that across other evidence from other trade unions and other sources in order to back that up as something you can rely on. There's already substantial amounts of free labour being given within the education system in order to maintain baseline provision. I wonder the extent to which any person being asked to exceed their contractual duties would be willing to do so on an ongoing basis. I think that's
do you not think most workers do more than they have to?
I'm not convinced that we could necessitate that people stay overnight on a residential. I think there are equality impacts. I think you would likely have a host of employment tribunal applications for those who are, have their own caring needs, for those who have their own disability, for
But at the moment we have a lot of volunteers, don't we?
Well, what I would say is that when we asked, and we asked more broadly around school trips rather than specifically in terms of residentials, we asked about whether teachers felt that trips were a benefit. And overwhelmingly they did. Over 90% of teachers said, yes, it's a good thing. And I suppose the question for the committee is about pulling that apart in whether you are willing to push the teachers' contract to breaking point to look at undermining the national bargaining mechanisms, or whether we can look at doing that in a different way. The feedback from members is that getting children and young people out of the classroom is revolutionary. It broadens their horizons. I think if we think about the windows and mirrors, providing an opportunity to see other people's life experiences other than what is on your own doorstep is of fundamental value. And indeed, we have a lot of evidence from our members through our cost of the living survey that says that school trips, that taking children and young people out of their own context to experiencing something different, provided that is done within a curricular context, is of benefit. Whether that then necessitates a residential experience is a separate and different question.
No, I do accept that. I mean, what about using volunteers? I mean, parents or maybe other volunteers in the community, would that take pressure off the teachers if some of the parents were willing to go on the trip?
I mean, I think it comes down to risk assessments. And, it's interesting, I suppose, that we're talking about risk assessments because as part of the National Action Plan on Behaviour in Schools, Phase 1, under, I think, Section 5 of that document talking about violent behaviour, says that there should be national guidance around risk assessments. And so the staffing contingent for any trip, whether that is a residential trip or whether that is a trip to the local park, requires to undergo a risk assessment process. And actually, it's worth taking a pause within our discussion to think about the increase in violent behaviour within schools and the increase about challenges that teachers are facing. And if we think about the measures and the risks that we would need to put into place in order to move that to a separate context out with the school, there are cost implications with that as well.
Yes. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Convener.
Sorry, Andrew, you wanted to come in on this point.
Just very quickly, I appreciate the means testing discussion is much wider and it fills that. But as a former head teacher in England and pupil premium, I often looked at how my funding came in, and I got that funding for that group of learners, but I was significantly concerned about the groups above that were, and that continues, and I know it continues in Scotland around this growing sort of band, and that's really important. And the second point is just that, yes, I've given Edinburgh's example of how we approach that, but the funding landscape across Scotland does vary. That's anecdotally from our membership. That's very clear, and I think the bill would support that. And just briefly on workforce, I mentioned it earlier on, and this is subject to safety and competence and suitable and sufficient supervision. We do see schools who are thinking creatively around volunteers, partners, but also people like trainee teachers who find going on a residential a really beneficial experience for them, and that's really important. So going on a residential can be real high quality CLPL, that learning, other teachers within the school as well. So I absolutely acknowledge the challenge of voluntary and contracts, but there are mixed solutions that are evident across Scotland where schools are being creative in that way, whilst maintaining safety and quality all the time.
Okay, that's great. Thanks so
and
much.
it's often enhanced as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to Evelyn Tweed.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, panel. Thanks for your answers so far. It's been really helpful. I'm interested in how schools ensure that residential outdoor education is part of a wider learning experience. And Tara, you said that it should be woven through the curriculum. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, I think Matthew earlier referenced the Learning for Sustainability Action Plan, and trade unions are represented on the group that's discussing that as well, and that provides a coherent overarching structure to embed learning for sustainability within Scottish education. And I suppose it's worth pulling that apart. Learning for sustainability is about sustainable development, global citizenship, as well as outdoor learning. So the outdoor learning aspect is only one part of that wider learning for sustainability branch. So there is work ongoing. Equally, the General Teaching Council for Scotland has a guide around learning for sustainability. There is information being provided through Education Scotland, which teachers can access on their website and through professional learning. What I would say, though, is that we are in a policy-rich environment for teachers. So by that I mean almost on a weekly, if not twice weekly basis, there's a new announcement coming out centrally, not necessarily always from government, but also from national strategic partners. And what that has resulted in within the system is overwhelm. So some of those core messaging is not necessarily reaching teachers. I think in that context as well, we have to remember that teachers in Scotland have one of the highest class contacts within Europe, and we are pending a reduction in 1.5 hours, and that time would free up teachers in order to do greater preparation and planning. But at the moment, it is a very busy policy environment for teachers, and so the extent to which learning for sustainability is able to be embedded is hampered by, I suppose, some of the noise around so many different things coming out at once for teachers.
So just as a short follow-up on that, so do you think some of this guidance and the discussions that are going on are not really landing because teachers are so busy and there is so much policy work going on?
I think it will be a patchwork position within Scotland. I think if we were to take any policy strand within education, there will be teachers who have a specific interest. And actually, within the national negotiations, we looked at the role of lead teacher, which, due to a lack of centralised funding, hasn't been utilised. But the role of lead teacher, as one example, would be a phenomenal way through which either work on equalities or work on learning for sustainability or work around curricular development could be targeted at a local level. You would have a leader within a cluster, within a context, within a school, who would be able to provide that co-delivery or shared learning experience. At the moment, as I think has been abundantly clear and has been referenced a number of times, there isn't the finance within the system, and at the moment teachers are crying out for more teachers on the ground, let alone lead teachers.
Okay. And to follow up again, how engaged are schools and pupils, and do they have a say in outcomes about residentials, you know, what they're going to get out of it?
Do you know, I think it is something that Scottish education does do well about framing the views of children and young people. And I suppose I would lean on the evidence from CPAG, who did a cost of the school day big question report, and they spoke to groups of children and young people. And their evidence largely aligns with evidence from trade unions and from others that there is value. The issues that children and young people raised within that report included access and finances. They raised issues to do with funding within the system. They raised issues to do with well-being for missing out, that they were worried that the children and young people who couldn't participate would have a negative impact on them. And they raised a whole host of reasons why trips were important to them as pupils and as learners within the system. Making memories, building relationships, feeling included, learning differently. So I think already there is a strong culture for embedding the views of children and young people, as we would anticipate with the implementation of the UNCRC. So I don't think that is a misstep in the current system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the panel. Thank you for joining us. Tara, you touched upon the fact that 90% of teachers have said this would be a good thing. And I think, you know, from the evidence we've received and from the consultation, it was quite clear that those teachers who submitted their views do see that additional benefit. And I wondered, my question was specifically around what impact does the panel think the bill will have on other aspects of outdoor learning, such as the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, or learning within school grounds in the local community currently being undertaken. I'll maybe bring you in, Andrew, in terms of the local authority aspect of that.
Yeah, just sorry, very quickly, I had a technical problem on the last question. I did want to just submit, make a comment on that. Would that still be possible, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Just really to how to embed residentials into the curriculum. I think we have to think at that in different levels. Local authority, starting at the national level in terms of policy and that sort of quality framework that we've talked about, embedded in, but also at the school and the local authority level. We've already talked about consulting, but I think it's really important that the workforce and schools and parents and young people understand the importance of residential visits. So how do they actually benefit? So that's rooted in evidence and how it can benefit them, how it can benefit their learners. And I think by having an ownership of that and understanding those benefits, then we're more likely to see that. I think curriculum planning and mapping is really important. The opportunities where residentials fit in. So thinking about where that fits in at the most appropriate place. We have a secondary school in Edinburgh that's done a fabulous piece of work consulting with its school community, thinking about where residentials, including overseas, fit in. So it's the totality of the experience and where it fits in best around the curriculum, and that's really important. And in East Lothian as well, there's a lovely example of a work where they focused on leadership and they embedded that into the curriculum, and the residential had a core part to play in developing residential leadership skills, which they then benefit elsewhere in the curriculum, which leads me on to this question, I guess. So lots of different levels that are required to embed that in the curriculum, but a fundamental understanding of how residentials benefit are really important, and that's a key driver. Okay. Do you want me to move on to the other question?
Yes, please.
Could I just... Is it okay if you can just repeat the question, sure, because I just lost a bit of connectivity as well.
No problem. It was with regards to what impact the bill could have on other outdoor learning taking place, such as the Duke of Edinburgh Awards.
Yeah, so I think, again, it's about thinking about where the residentials take place in that progression. But what we're seeing around the evidence around this is relationships. That's a key benefit around residential visits, relationships between learners, but also with staff. And I think staff become more aware of their needs, and those schools that embed that back in their learning make that really very clear. I think residentials also can switch learners onto certain career pathways or learning pathways as well. So it gives them a taste of a residential. It gives them the confidence then to engage in other activities such as the Duke of Edinburgh. It gives them aspirations in terms of, for example, geography and the sciences to go in a pathway where they're designing their research in an outdoor sense, looking at the outdoor experiments and field work along there. So I think there's the generic skills that residentials, there's clear evidence of benefiting, that then signpost them, and then the benefits are then brought back into the school. Recent research, I think, from Prince in 2022 very much looks at the importance of schools recognising what the benefits have been, harnessing those benefits, and then bringing them back into the wider context of the school as well.
Thanks for that. Could I just ask Andrew, last year 20,144 young people started their Duke of Edinburgh Award in Scotland. Of that, an amazing 1,847 achieved the Gold Award, but currently you will need to include residential event, as it's described, to achieve that Gold Award. So just in terms of your experience, do you think there's barriers and inequalities currently within the state sector of our young people being able to go on to achieve that Gold Award from the young people you're within Edinburgh City Council helping get into outdoor education opportunities?
I think there could be across Scotland. I think schools and local authorities work hard at providing a range of opportunities around that gold, but also the richness of experience. Residential is built into bronze, silver and gold at Duke of Edinburgh, and that's a key part of achievement. Our intelligence tells us in Edinburgh, but we've done some recent work on bronze, that actually the residential component is not a barrier. We've looked at the achievement rate, and of those that have not reached that achievement, they're still achieving other sections, and we try and unpick that. So the data that we've got actually is that the expedition is a higher, but still work to be done, and could be a barrier linked to the comments that we've talked about previously about staff confidence, capacity to do that as well.
Thank you for that. Matthew, or Tara?
Yeah, so thank you. I think reflecting a lot of what Andrew would say, I suppose I'm conscious that our colleagues in the Association of Directors of Education in Scotland are slightly worried that there's a chance that the bill could perhaps displace some of the other activity that goes on in outdoor learning, because this would sort of be the main focus then for outdoor learning. And I think, as Tara pointed out a minute ago, we do have quite a policy rich, I think is a polite way of putting it, I would say very busy in terms of what we're being asked to do. So I suppose that still remains to be seen a little bit. I suppose that's part of some of the concerns we raised in our response, and I think also the Scottish Government set out in their memorandum about sort of the challenges of legislating for one bit of the curriculum. Obviously, I think only our religious and moral education is legislated at the moment, and if we legislate on another area of the curriculum, what does that mean for the broader framework that we're kind of creating at the moment? And I suppose also with the Duke of Edinburgh, I suppose absolutely those are important, but there are a lot of awards that children and young people can go on to do, and some of them might not be in the outdoor side of the call. There could be vocational, practical. There's a lot of opportunities that we want children and young people to have, and I suppose thinking about that sort of delicate balance of how we approach that is really important. And just lastly, and this might link back to the last question as well a little bit, I suppose it's really important that this is considered, and there's stronger links, should the bill be sort of successful and taken forward, between Education Scotland's curriculum improvement cycle, where I think we are now sort of getting into that space where we're having a range of practitioners coming together, having a think about sort of the broad shape of the curriculum and updating sort of the technical architecture of sort of the sort of curriculum for excellence, and how do we make sure that we're kind of creating these links and kind of hopefully addressing some of that sort of busyness that we've got at the moment.
I think largely Matthew covered that. I suppose the only point to pick up was in terms of the percentage of our respondents who said they saw a benefit of school trips. That was school trips more broadly as opposed to specifically around residential. And the other point I would highlight is about the knock-on impacts within the wider sector around opening the door to profiteering, potentially, with third sector agencies, companies seeing an opportunity to siphon funds from education in order to support schools to meet that need, because currently there wouldn't be enough provision across Scotland in order to meet the needs of all learners. So it does risk opening that door to profiteering and removal of funding from education.
Can I just finally and briefly, do you collect any data at all on teachers who want to volunteer to take part in these additional curricular activities because they see the benefit to their young people, and what that then looks like? You know, you mentioned the additional 10 hours, you have some data around, but extracurricular work teachers are doing on a voluntary basis.
I don't think we do keep that level of granular detail. I think it's fair to say that teachers do an awful lot of unpaid, whether that is staying late to coach a local football group, or whether that is giving up their lunch hour to support curricular development and support for young people, whether that is running out to Tesco's in the morning before you get to work in order to buy breakfast bars, because the children and young people who are arriving aren't going to be well fed and ready to learn. So I think there are lots of examples within the system about the extent to which teachers are going above and beyond. And to be honest, I think if you were speaking to teachers directly, they would say in large part they feel like magicians. They're being asked to create something from nothing on a daily basis. So I think there are plenty of examples, but in terms of granular data, I wouldn't have that to give you.
Thanks, Camille.
But I suppose on that point, a teacher who's interested in football will want to coach and help with football club, and someone who doesn't have that interest won't. So if we understand more the levels or the volume of teachers who are interested in this and want to do it, it may allow us to see across the country just where that interest is. And it's, I think trying to say, this is going above and beyond, which it undoubtedly is, but they're doing it because they have an interest there anyway, and they want to do that, and they want to share their own experiences. Is that not fair to say?
I think there is a difference between giving up 50 minutes at the end of a school day in order to coach a local football team versus a week-long 5-day residential in terms of the impact on individual teachers.
But it's not just 50 minutes, so it's coaching throughout the week, it's speaking to pupils who've got an interest in football, getting them to get involved. I mean, it would be several hours, and then it's weekend football matches as well. I don't know any teacher that coaches just for 50 minutes once a week. It is more substantial than that.
But it is voluntary, so they aren't mandated. So
but because they have that interest and they want to share that with others and their pupils.
I think if we were moving towards basing our educational foundation on a voluntary basis, that would be quite serious, and I would wonder whether we would be asking our healthcare professionals to be volunteering for additional shifts just out of the goodness of their heart. I think there is a cultural difficulty within education about expecting teachers, because they go into the job in order to support learners and they go above and beyond to do that. I think we have to be really careful that goodwill is not abused.
Okay. We move now to Willie Rennie.
So financial memorandums come up a few times. Matthew, I just want to ask you whether you've obviously looked at the detail of the financial memorandum and what your view on it is. Is it accurate, in other words?
I think generally, the view would be that the costs of actual costs wouldn't probably be fully captured by the financial memorandum. I think some of that's covered in what we've already discussed today. So I think additional staffing costs, I don't think there's much in there at the moment around the financial memorandum around staff, because of sort of the expectation around it being met by the sort of current voluntary position. I suppose that seems quite difficult to quantify just now. I think, as we've discussed already, however that would be resolved, if that's to be resolved through the SNCT, that's very difficult to understand how much that might cost. So I think that's a major one. I I think in terms of the actual use of the centres themselves, I think some of this has already come up in discussion. I think in terms of the fact that I think definitely the view that we heard back from our members when discussing the financial memorandum is that the current estimates are quite low, and obviously they'll continue increasing due to inflation. I think the other thing they flagged was they're probably going to look quite different depending on where you are in the country, and that actually different providers obviously, and there's a diversity of prices amongst what local authorities are being charged depending on kind of what provision they're looking for. Similarly, transport costs, another one that we've said, I think that there's a little bit of an underestimate. Some of that is around, again, just increasing prices we're facing because of the broader cost issues. But then I think particularly the points I raised earlier around sort of additional sort of rural transport as well. Additional support needs, I think, again, we've also covered that, and we're not sure if that's totally captured. And then I think some of those questions around costs around sort of the things that children and young people might need to take part in these things, you know, clothing, bedding, food, all those types of things, how they'd be met. And I suppose lastly, I think there's a question about capacity, which we also have already discussed today. And if there is new capacity that needs to be created, sort of that will obviously have an additional cost. And who and how that cost is sort of created and met, I think will be a question as well.
Thank you for setting that out succinctly. That's helpful. At the end of the day, this comes down to priorities. And it's not, in some ways, of course, it's about money, but there's money there. It's just how we spend it is the issue. I get the people have said today that it's important to do this. But is it very important? Is it more important than the other things that we're doing? Tara, do you want to kick off? Where does it fit in your priorities?
I think our members would say that trips are a priority, getting learning outside of the classroom environment. But whether that would go as far as residential, I think we need to distinguish the two, that there does need to be an opportunity to go outside your own context, but that doesn't necessarily necessitate residential. And at the moment, we are in an increasingly challenging fiscal environment. At the moment, we have local authorities who are cutting hundreds of teachers from their budget. We have lobbies from parents' organisations around additional support needs, making it clear that their children and young people, through no fault of teachers, are not being able to access the provision to which they're entitled. We're not able to get it right for every child because that support, that additional staffing, is not in place on the ground. And so in a context of having to make those difficult decisions fiscally, that prioritisation will need to be balanced. And I think while we would say that any opportunity for residential education should be equitable, we would argue for universality on a basic principle that education should be free at source. I do think there are questions as to whether this is the priority in this moment in the context of cuts to teacher numbers and cuts to additional support provision. And I think sitting underneath that, what we've not said to date is around the family fundraising activities. And I just want to put on record that when we surveyed members, about a third of them said that their school was using local community fundraising for core educational business. And speaking to teachers, there is exceptional discomfort around that. And indeed, one teacher said to me, it feels like grifting, that they are taking from communities who do not have the funds in order to subsidise education, and that intrinsically that is placing them in a difficult position. So the last point around funding would be about ring fencing, that even if this is identified as the priority moving forward, will it be ring-fenced? Because there are plenty of government priorities that come out, but because of the nature of the funding mechanisms within education, the accountability for that being spent on what was promised is not always there.
Andrew, do you have a view? Where does it fit in your priorities?
And certainly from Edinburgh's context, it is important. It fits in with our educational plans around health and well-being. So that's rooted in our evidence in terms of the benefits of residentials, and we've touched on already how they impact others. And, you know, back to the importance of other outdoor learning actually is not just the output of the residential, but that directly impacts to the residential, so the preparation, building up confidence just in the local area. So we do value that. We put a lot of resources into making sure that we maintain a high attendance figure, and that requires a lot of support, a lot of hard work by schools, and that's because...
Sorry, Andrew, can I interrupt you? It's not about the value of it, it's about the priority of it. Where does it fit in your priorities?
And what I mean by that is because it's valued, that's of high priority for us, and that's understanding. So that's what the point is that because it's valued by parents, it's valued by staff, it's valued by the learners, and they can see the impact. Because of that, it has a higher priority for us.
Okay, Matthew, do you have anything else to add on this?
Just that I think we'd probably say that I think that we just launched our sort of budget lobbying campaign, I think earlier this week, and I think really keen to flag the fact that actually there are a range of pressures on local government budgets, particularly I think some of those in education have already been expounded on, but also the broader supports that we provide children and young people through social work, early intervention services, libraries, culture. All of those are fundamental to increasing attainment. I'm not sure if just one, supporting one alone is going to be this would be the exact one to increase attainment and provide the best outcome for children and young people. I think we need to have a balance of that, and I think that's why we need sort of that space for local authorities to be able to make those decisions if they do have those declining budgets, that they know their communities best and are able to make decisions based on sort of those local needs. I suppose that's where we maybe differ with Tara in terms of ring fencing, because often what we see is there's a ring fence pot comes in, but then what means is we get less into the local government settlement, which means that we're just not able to continue to provide the same settlement, same level of service.
Whole other debate.
Indeed.
Okay, thank you.
Just on that point, though, Matthew, if this isn't the solution, I mean, there's nothing else coming forward. You're saying that it's not the top priority because it may not be the one thing that could improve in attainment. But is there anything else you would say that money could go to that would improve attainment?
Absolutely. So I think providing that money to sort of the systems that we've got existingly and making sure that they're able to meet the growing demands.
But that would then be different right across the country.
Absolutely. So it would be different in terms of the residential, but there are going to, Scotland's schools and communities are very different in terms of what they need, in terms of their demographics, their geography. They're going to have different needs to make them sure.
But we also heard from Andrew, given the current situation, there's 40% of primary school pupils aren't getting any outdoor education. So if we just put more money into what we're doing at the moment, there's still going to be a chunk of pupils that don't get any residential outdoor education.
So I thought your question was around the priority. Is it priorities around residential education or priorities around generally what's going to improve attainment for children and young people?
Well, generally what would improve education and attainment, but if the whole panel has agreed, and our previous panel last week agreed that this is a good thing, if it's not this bill and this priority to combine both that opportunity for outdoor education and improve attainment, what else is there?
Well, I think there's the work that's ongoing that we've discussed already about the Learning for Sustainability. There's the Outdoor Education Working Group that the Scottish Government have set up, where we're going to look at this in the round and maybe answer some of those questions about how do you have a residential fitting within the curricular framework, some of which I think Tara described before. But I also think we need to look at that in the context of broader sort of improvement priorities. Pardon me. Some of that is including in the sort of the National Improvement Framework, and there's sort of a process ongoing in terms of that. But for example, the International Council of Education Advisors have said in terms of the short term what we should be looking at is issues around leadership and issues around the quality of professional learning and development for teachers. So that, to me, seems like that would be where we might want to focus something in the short term, because that's kind of some of the evidence we're given about how we can make some of those improvements.
And Andrew, could I just ask you before we move to George Adam, in terms of your written submission, you said the £300 to £400 estimate for the primary school allocation is considered too low to deliver high quality provision that maximises the impact. What figure do you think it should be?
I think just firstly there's going to be variation, but from our perspective as a council, from Edinburgh's perspective, I think we're getting nearer the 500 mark in terms of the allowing in terms of investment for providers. It can't just go. We've got to invest. SAPA in particular recognise the importance of investing in their infrastructure as well. So I think it's really important. I think there need to be some more work about what that would look like across the sector. I'm hedging a little bit of a figure there, but I think...
But you also say, sorry, in your sentence before, that you acknowledge the challenge of modelling and coming up with these figures. So it's going to be very difficult to do that, isn't it?
Indeed. I think that's something that we could do as a local authority with the operations we've got, but that's the complexity across the country, and I think that's what we meant by that response was that there's lots of different providers and delivery models and self-led, and therefore modelling that and what's an accurate figure is very, very challenging. But obviously we have our viewpoint. Edinburgh has a viewpoint on a particular model, but that would be developed in consultation with our schools and our families and communities as well.
Okay, George Adam.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, everyone. I've listened to everything that you've said this week and what we heard last week. And last week in particular, we heard that, you know, the outcomes for young people at these outdoor education centres is they become good world leaders, and they'll be a lot better person. They'll give them a focus on what they want to do in life. But from my own perspective, I'm trying not to be a grumpy old man when I'm going through this. But when I look at it, you know, a lot of young people I know, my own family, my own children, gained a lot of that from other things in school. You know, whether it be the football team, whether it be netball, whether it be other sporting endeavours or academic endeavours, they get that as well. So, you know, what are the intended outcomes for the residential centres in your opinion, and how does it feed into what we already currently do? Because I'm struggling to kind of marry that up, where I think Matthew in particular has already said that there's quite a lot of work we're already doing, and doing something that's nationally might kind of take away from that as well, and that's one of the concerns I have. Matthew.
Yeah, happy to carry on. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, yeah, as you mentioned, sort of, I think that there is a range of activity that we're already doing, which is looking at sort of outdoor education in the wider sense. And I think, as I said at the start, I think that where we've been able to invest, I think we've been able to sort of adapt that. So it's sort of part of the day-to-day learning within schools and around childcare across the country. So I think that's really important. I think that your broader point, though, I think that, you know, the needs of Scotland's communities, the needs of children and young people are really diverse. It may be that this is part of a package, but there will be other things that are going to work for the other children and young people.
Well, just for clarity, the area I come from, you know, the vast majority, not all, wouldn't know what a Duke of Edinburgh award was if it bit them in the backside. You know, so, you know, how do we kind of deal with these kind of kids? And, you know, they're not likely to engage with it. From experience in my own area community, they're not likely to engage with these kind of things.
And I think that's part of the point. I think we're about the sort of the caution, I suppose, about legislating on one part of the curriculum, when actually I think what we want is that schools, teachers are able to kind of understand what their local communities need and be able to fit the curriculum that works for them. Now, part of that, I think, goes into a point Tara raised earlier about the senior phase and the approach that we want to take around that to make sure that sort of children, young people's achievements are able to be reflected. But I think we'd be in the position of agreeing absolutely that we need to have as much flexibility open for schools to design curriculums, design sort of opportunities for achievement that meet the needs of children and young people and are able to provide them with the support that they need to achieve and sort of get on into a sort of course of you know, their future life, their career, their confidence, meeting the 4 capacities of the curriculum for excellence in a way that works for them.
And Tara, your members, you've talked about the challenges and it's almost like a plate spinning kind of exercise for teachers to make sure they're getting everything done. So how do they make sure that young people can achieve all that? Because they'll surely be saying there's certain young people who engage in certain ways and this might not necessarily be the way to do it. You've already mentioned that there's a lot more value your members believe in day trips as well.
I think we need to pin this from the top line level. So from the national discussion, the vision and purpose of education set out, as it were, 3 strands in terms of impact on sort of individual life skills, impact on, you know, your learning journey for work, and impact on your wider community. And so if we think about those 3 top level aims, outcomes, vision for education, everything else should stack neatly underneath. And teachers are very skilled at knowing their young people who are in front of them. They're very skilled at being able to differentiate. They're, you know, a well-trained workforce who know their local context, who are able to say, this isn't going to land with my group of young people. This is going to need an alternative approach. And I don't think it is a lack of knowledge and skills on the part of the workforce that is a barrier often in terms of providing localised opportunities. I think often the barrier is finance and the barrier is time. And So I don't think there is a difficulty with teachers being able to identify what is appropriate for their context. They may not have the funds in order to implement it, and they may not have the time in order to develop the curriculum to the extent that they would wish.
Tara, you mentioned there might be some capacity issues with should this become mandatory and part of the curriculum, and you also said you had a fear of maybe money that would be going into education getting taken out. Now, when you mentioned that, that kind of frightened me a wee bit as well, because can you maybe elaborate on that a wee bit more? Because I can see where you're coming from, and I think it's an important point.
I think it's a reflection on how PEF has landed. So when we had identified money distributed around pupil equity funding, which was in order to target learners who had socioeconomic disadvantage and in order to bridge the attainment gap, out of the woodwork came a number of consultants and agencies who purported for a sum to be able to assist schools. And that would be perhaps in behavioural approaches or in other avenues. And I think it's natural that where there is identified funding from government and there may be a gap within service, that other providers may look to see if there is an advantage with that. And that was the reason that we raised that as a potential risk, that where the facility isn't currently existing, either Scottish Government or local authorities would need to have the funds in order to purchase additional outdoor centres, or we are then reliant on either third sector or corporate organisations.
Mm-hmm. You wanted to come in to the earlier question.
Yes, if I may. It was a question around, what makes residentials, what's the difference around residentials and other types of outdoor learning and other activity as well. I mean, in Edinburgh, we look at, and colleagues across Scotland, we look at that triangulation of that. There is research that looks at the benefits of residentials in terms of relationships, the challenges, that social development, and the living together. Really important that living together has distinct benefits. And that's through the lens of a different environment, intensity and activity. But we also look at speaking to people's views, so the learners. So every now and again I talk to a learner group at our centres, and I did that last week. And I ask a really a key question for me is, why come to Laganlear or Benmore? Why go on a residential? Can we do some of these things closer to home within Edinburgh, within those locations? And one young person really made some really good points around a residential allows them to go to a more remote location. So they talked about, yes, I can climb Arthur's Seat. Yes, I can experience Arthur's Seat, but it's so busy. But coming on a residential, I can go to a more remote location. I can access a more location. They said that they had quality time in the evenings to actually experience talking to each other and unpicking things, and that was really important to them. Because they were there in the evening, they could watch the stars. We have these new telescopes, so they could try new activities and new experience. Former head teacher at Canal View, very clearly makes the point that the children in her community, this gives them the opportunity to widen horizons, see new opportunities, and that's fundamental and critical. And a parent, we had feedback recently, said, as a parent, and I quote, I believe it's essential that our children get the opportunity to experience new places. Some of our kids have never get beyond their very local spaces, and she was really clear the value that she puts on that for her child and for them as a family too, that may not be possible otherwise.
But Andrew, my kind of what I'm trying to put forward is these can be experienced by young people and young learners in other scopes, like a sports team going on a tour and fundraising to go and do that as well. There'll be an overnight element to that. I probably remember more sporting endeavours and staying with teams overnight than I do my time in Ardentiny as a kid. So, and I know the world's changed quite a lot since I was that age, but my argument is surely there's an argument to be made that it's not just this type of outdoor experience or this type of residential kind of stay that makes that difference in young people's lives. Other people are motivated by other things.
I completely respect that, and we have part of our membership, particularly the Hebrideans and Shetlands and remote places, where actually a contrasting residential needs to focus on other things as well, and that's back to that flexibility and autonomous approach around that. But I think by bringing it into the curriculum, we maximise outcome and we have that equity of experience as well. So I don't disagree with you. There's a place for lots of these things, but it's about structuring it and planning and thinking about the quality of experience and outcomes that go beyond just that living together, but also those career pathways and learning pathways too.
Can I ask one final question?
Please, yeah.
Of Tara in particular? In your written evidence, and you've gone further today, you actually said you advise members to participate only in visits with clear educational outcomes and proper approval. Now, you've already said today how you've advised not to go on the whole because there's all kinds of other... now, that's quite concerning in itself. And I'm also quite concerned that you say that it could probably, the paying conditions of teachers, it could open up that as well. Can you maybe give me some further detail on why that's such a major issue in this? And it probably affects the financial memorandum, as already has been mentioned by Matthew earlier on.
I suppose, as a trade union, our fundamental purpose is to support members and to negotiate terms and conditions and pay on their behalf. And in doing so, we look to the best interest to protect our members in their workplaces. And in doing so, that's the context for the advice that we give around the personal and professional risks to individual teachers. It is a non-contractual duty, and the best way in order to protect yourself from any criticism levied at you is to not participate. And that's the I suppose the starting point from the trade union response. Obviously, teachers do. They are dedicated and committed to the children and young people, and not only under this, but as we've discussed already on a number of headings, go above and beyond. And I suppose for us, it's about the appropriateness of relying on goodwill in order to further a national agenda. And as a trade union interested in the terms and conditions of our members and protecting them at work, I don't think that's something that we could be in favour of.
Okay, could I thank all of you for your evidence today. Andrew, you said you would go back and ask your members some of the questions, so if you feed that back into the committee, that will be very helpful. But thank you for what you submitted before and the evidence you've given us today, and I'll suspend the meeting until 10:45 when we'll resume with our second panel. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, members, and welcome to our second panel of witnesses. We have Phil Thompson, Development Manager, Ardroy Outdoor Education Centre, Nick March, Association of Heads of Outdoor Education Centres Scotland, Frida Fallon, Development Manager, Scotland Outward Bound Trust, and Jamie Miller, Chief Executive of the Scottish Outdoor Education Centres. Can I welcome you all to the committee? You know we are doing our Stage 1 deliberations of Liz Smith's bill. I wonder, just as an opening question, I understand you were watching the earlier evidence session and just wondered if you had any thoughts on what you'd heard from some of the representatives looking at the teaching profession and local authorities, anything in that, and particularly what you can tell us about your own individual organisations and the importance of your work that you're doing across Scotland. Maybe, Mr Miller, if I can start with you.
Thanks very much. Yes, we watched the last session with quite a lot of interest, really. So, for us, so my organisation, it's got quite a long history. We've been going since 1939, providing outdoor adventurous learning for lots of young people in Scotland. And we see our job very much as allied with the teaching profession. So the teaching profession is really important. They're the conduit for the learning that takes place at our centres, so that can be expressed back in the classroom and the wider education environment. So, so it's important for us that that education isn't lost and will help to facilitate further education for the young people back in the rural environment. So, again, for us, it's a facilitative process. The activities that we do are merely a vehicle for learning. It's not about the activities themselves. It's about how the young people learn and develop from that. And that can be social learning, but it can also be environmental learning, for example, or even numeracy or literacy, because we can look at angles. Things are quite pragmatic. You can look at forces, dynamics, that sort of stuff. So for us, it's very much not about the activities themselves, but rather what the young people can learn and develop from that. And the social learning is very important from that as well. It could be resilience, it could be personal development, it could be teamworking skills, communication, that kind of thing. And all of that is immediately transferable back to the school environment.
Yeah. Ms Fallon.
Hi, great to be here, so thank you for having us all along. When I watched the previous session, for me it was about how do we address some of those issues that they're talking about when we get the chance for this bill to happen. So how do we, with you as parliamentarians, how do we, with the previous panel, look at making this happen? And actually broaden that, looking at what does education mean to be a citizen of Scotland? Looking at Professor Hayward's review, what would it mean to be qualified to be an education of Scotland in the 21st century? What knowledge, skills, capacities will learners need to thrive? And actually, when they spoke with learners, schools, colleges, employers, universities, it was the ability to work together, to use knowledge, to tackle problems, to think creatively, to persevere. They are the examples of skills that will be needed. And my feeling is we can contribute to that as a sector, and I'm excited to be here to discuss it today.
Thank you. Mr March.
Hello, I represent all the outdoor centres in Scotland that are membership, the heads of centres, so I have a lot of understanding, and I also run my own, look after the Lagganlia Centre on behalf of the City of Edinburgh. So I'd like to first of all move the storyline of how outdoor centres work these days. They were built in Jamie's time of the centres, being built for that pre-war. How do we look after people for the next conflict? Centres have moved, and I think that was a big piece of evidence missing from last week's narrative, in that we are no longer looking just at throwing people into kayaks and hoping they're going to come back better people. We've moved on. So if we can move that narrative along, everyone, that would be fantastic. Our first job is building relationships, and the high-quality outdoor learning, which is being written into the new quality framework, as spoken about in the previous session, is a really key part of this. The relationship between us and the school is everything. I do a large amount of work with every teacher coming to us to ensure that every learner needs and that the course is written. Parts of it about could it be done with, for example, within a football camp or an overnight stay. The key parts in a residential are access to the environment, enabling the learning for sustainability policy. We keep hearing about the learning for sustainability policy. We are involved in enabling it. We're going to take children to these wonderful wild spaces that are not in Shettleston. They're not in these places. They are going to enable a child to touch, smell, and really come home with a sense of what a wild space in Scotland is about. For when they get back into the classroom, they are then going to be able to engage in how do I go about looking after our planet for the future. The story of the relationship, I'd like to just share very quickly something from a teacher from yesterday. I told her I was coming here and she said, Nick, this is it for me. It's the foundation for the year ahead, and the relationships that are forged on residential make the relationships in the classroom far stronger, more understanding, more effective. Relationships are at the heart of what we do. Positive relationships between staff and pupils and within staff teams make anything possible and learning limitless. There is nothing more effective to high-quality teaching and learning than strong and positive relationships. And there is nothing more effective to achieve these quality relationships than a week at residential. So if we are looking at empowering teachers and really trying to enable them to have the draw to school, we keep hearing now about attendance and how attendance is a huge challenge. We are looking about engaging pupils. Residential weeks are so powerful in doing this, and it puts the child at the heart of this. And this is what we hope to do today in showing the stories of the children and showing how a lot of the issues about, you heard about teachers who are really challenged at the moment, and I see that day in, day out. I'm not going to deny that that's not a reality, but we feel that the residential empowers them and makes teaching in the classroom it addresses so many of the issues that we heard about. I'm sure I'm keen to contribute to the financial question later on in this. I'll let
Mr. Thompson.
Yes, good morning. You asked the question, what did I think of this morning session? I think there's something that's been missing so far has been the voice of the young person. We've got into the weeds a little bit too much, and obviously that's why the committee is here. It's entirely within your remit to ask all the hard questions. But what I see every day, what I hear every day, is young people learning and achieving in Ardroy, the Outdoor Education Centre that I specifically represent. And I hope the four of us will bring you the voice of the young person. Yes, it's a lot of money. Yes, it's a major bit of legislation. But at the bottom of all of this are incredible opportunities for Scottish young people. And that, directly answering your question, I think is the thing that I think we need to highlight in the next 90 minutes.
Yep.
You asked very briefly, sorry, about my background. Just very quickly, I'm from Ardroy in Loch Goilhead. There's an interesting backstory to this. We were opened in 1969 by Fife Council. The Fife Council decided they couldn't afford us in 2011. We were shut down. We then reopened a couple of months later. In fact, it's 13 years to the day since we reopened, now operating as a social enterprise and a charity, still largely delivering the same outcomes, but doing it without any support from any local authority. So we, if you like, are a third sector success story, but it's a challenging world out there.
Okay, I know we're very keen to hear the views of young people that you work with. Just on the point that we heard from the union representative, I mean, it was portrayed as quite a difficult period for teachers in general, which I think we all agree with. But we heard phrases like this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back, etc., in terms of pay negotiations and such. Like, what do you get back from teachers who are with you? I know, Mr. March, I thought that was a very helpful comment that you read out from that teacher yesterday. But more generally, what are the teachers saying when they're with you, when they're preparing to be with you, and afterwards, the feedback you get from teachers in particular? Ms. Fallon.
Yeah, I can certainly contribute on that. We have just done an evaluation of 200 teachers, which just to get their views on what they benefit from. And certainly there's a quote here from Lanark Grammar, which I think really sums it up. How those relationships that are built on residential can then be transferred back to benefit the classroom. So on a more everyday level, there are kids who are maybe on the edge of school, on the periphery of being involved in the classroom, or involved in something outside school they shouldn't be. After Outward Bound, they're much more engaged, much more likely to talk to you, much more likely to have a positive relationship with you in the corridors when you bump into them. If you say something to them, they take it from you because you've spoken to them at Outward Bound and you've maybe picked them up on something. And beyond that, 90% of teachers report that young people are more confident in their interactions with adults at school after a course, while 86% have improved relationships with their pupils following having been in residential. 80% saw the qualities in their pupils they do not or cannot show in the school environment. And 75% increased understanding of their pupils' abilities, which then supported the learning back in school. So I think from those very little snapshots, you'll see that it's not just the young people that are benefiting. Those teachers benefits in terms of the relationships, the quality of the enthusiasm. I think it was 64% said that their own enthusiasm for teachers had increased as well. They've learnt new skills, they'd seen new ways of working with young people, they built rapport with them in a new environment, and been in the gorge, shared, connected. When we had a visitor to Lochiel recently, they were speaking with a group in one of our areas returning from expedition, and actually it was the teacher talking about the young people supporting them on expedition that mattered most, and it was that was the most striking. And whenever I go to the centre at the end of a week, the teachers are talking about individual pupils, and the joy that I feel from them in seeing that development is stellar. But I think that does come from the quality of the experience of having one instructor with one group, and the teacher who accompanies that group will stay with them for the duration of the time, taking part, and that's really essential that they're part of that development. But we support every other aspect. We have 24-hour pastoral care, we think about the food. They're there to support the development of the young people and transfer that development back to school for the benefit of the wider community.
Okay, thank you very much. We do, obviously, with a panel of 4 witnesses, we'll have to keep things moving, so I think that covers it very well. We'll move first to Evelyn Tweed.
Convener, and good morning panel, and thanks for all your evidence so far. My question is about whether the level of provision of residential outdoor education is declining, and if so, what are the reasons for this?
The outdoor centres have been on a journey since the post-war, since the explosion of local authority funded centres in the 1960s. We went through obviously a number of generations of cuts, and many of those sectors have moved into third sector. And they've not moved there, and I'd like to counter an argument that was put forward earlier, for profiteering. I can't think of a least likely way of profiteering than opening an outdoor centre. The key part here, I would suggest, is that the third sector have done it through heart, because they believe so much in the education service that's been brought to them. However, because of that heart and because of the affordability, all centres are driven to keep the price as affordable as possible, because we are so aware of the young people and the areas of deprivation that we work with. So overall, I would suggest to the panel that at the moment that each centre tries to hide its capital cost, or not even include its capital cost within the price of its residential. Over time, therefore, as soon as a centre is presented with a significant challenge, a fire escape, whatever, that centre unfortunately becomes unsustainable. So it's all about the heart of it, is about the building. So the decline of the centre comes back down to affordability and how the third sector can fund it. So in a recent meeting of the AOEC members, we discussed outly how they are funding their capital cost, and their capital cost all have to come through a separate funding mechanism in order to supply and look after their buildings, because we know without the building, we don't have a centre. So the decline over time is firmly rooted in being able to look after and support the building whilst keeping cost affordable to the young person.
And do you have ideas about how support could be given to tackle these issues?
So looking at with a sustained funding model, if it enabled each child within Scotland to take away the financial challenge and make this equitable. So a big part of, I believe in this policy, is about equity and about allowing each young person from each area within Scotland to access this opportunity. This would have changed the way centres work. And I think we need to address how, if your ambition of the outdoor residential is for outdoor learning and the benefit to the child coming back into the classroom, it takes away a lot of the seasonality of it. So outdoor learning within my own centre is spread throughout the whole year, and actually the highest demand is not the summer months. It's post-summer up until the Christmas, with a P7 group that are trying to have the maximum impact over the course of the year. It's changed the narrative of when schools are looking for their residentials. The bill will look to, I hope, to look at high quality outdoor learning and look at these outcomes. And I believe, therefore, that the structure of when schools come into residentials will change. As an example, Blair Vaddock Outdoor Centre, the City of Glasgow-owned outdoor centre, is at capacity through the year because young people are looking at the opportunity of targeted outdoor learning over the simply jumping in a kite for a splash in the summer. And I think that's important to just differentiate what we all know between outdoor learning and outdoor recreation. Outdoor recreation is something which we all do for pleasure and fun. I do it myself. I go climbing and walking in the weekends. However, our centres at high quality level are not focused on outdoor recreation. We're not there to give the big whooshy zip slide. We're there to engage the pupil in the classroom. So when we take that into context, I believe that residentials will spread throughout the course of the 12 months. Young people will look and will try and engage everyone through the calendar. This will allow centres to have a full sort of business pattern through the year and make them more financially sustainable over the course of time.
So a lot of it, do you think, will come down to flexibility in what's offered when, and it will be spread over 12 months?
Over 12 months, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to come in on that? No, fine with that. Submissions have highlighted tight margins, low wages, high turnover of staff. Do you think there are sufficient numbers of aspirant instructors coming into the industry and staying in the industry?
Across Scotland at the moment, I believe staffing internally is our biggest challenge. But that is staffing and HR across Scotland is a generic thing. This isn't located just in outdoor centres. So we'll be speaking about in terms of outdoor centres. High quality outdoor learning centres need someone that has a firm understanding of teaching and the teaching progression and curriculum for excellence and learning for sustainability, whilst marrying that up with a raft of safety tickets that allow them to journey into those spaces to teach. So that journey to take someone to that level is the challenge. Lots of young people may come into this industry for outdoor recreation and spend a summer in it and then think, and then to take them on. However, because of our challenging financial times and young centres and young people not being able to afford this experience, the ability for third sector centres to engage the young people and keep them on and take them on career paths is also very challenged. The bill would definitely have an impact on this, and it would have an impact on the universities and colleges. So the recent quality framework document, which is underway with Education Scotland curriculum team, we invited the universities to that process, and they are very aware of engaging and how they would have to change their courses to suit and provide young people into this new space.
Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the panel. Thanks for joining us this morning. The number of pupils who are undertaking residential outdoor education is not centrally collected. So I wanted to ask specifically how many pupils you're aware of, especially coming from the state sector, are currently undertaking residential outdoor education. And is that predominantly the councils which still own their facilities?
If you like, the simple answer is nobody knows exactly. There is a system called Evolve. It's an excursion management software that 13 local authorities use in Scotland. Edinburgh and Glasgow don't use it. So there is no standard metric of knowing exactly how many children attend residentials in Scotland at the moment. If you compare that with Wales, where they recently had a residential bill, they all used Evolve. They could tell you to the decimal point how many children were attending. So yes, there's a definite need to do that. From my experience, we see about 2,000, 2,500 children a year coming through Ardroy. But yes, at the moment, there is no central metric of measuring that directly. We don't have that figure. Any figures that we do have are inferred or implied from other sources.
Okay, thanks for that, Phil. Sorry, Frida, did you?
I think sort of likewise, really, we work with about 10,000 young people every year across our 3 sites and with a number of local authorities throughout Scotland. But again, the metric's just not clear, and some local authorities are very supportive and some less so. So, you know, we don't have a representative body throughout Scotland, although we do work with a number of local authorities.
Yeah, and similarly, I would say the Outward Bound Trust works with 25,000 young people across the UK. 5,000 of those come from Scotland. We work with about 28 of the 32 authorities in Scotland, but it's pockets of schools. And my experience is it definitely feels a bit of a postcode lottery, where you come from and if you get the opportunity and if your head teacher is supportive or not, and it's not good enough. That there's benefits for the experience that we're providing that should be available to all.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Thank you for that.
Come back in.
Just going to say that you asked the question about local authorities. There are now only 9 local authority education centres left in Scotland. There were 70 in 1972, so there has been an overall decline in provision directly by the local education authority. It's been moved out to the third sector where margins are tight, where we're doing our best to employ staff that can afford a mortgage, where we're bringing value into the rural economy. But just to clarify the point, there are very few LEA centres left in Scotland now. Nearly all of them have closed.
Yeah. Last week we heard, I think, quite consensus around the evidence we took that 3 or more days is the sort of beneficial point at which outdoor education can be experienced by young people. So I just wanted to follow on with that question. Is there a minimum number of pupils or length of stay you think makes visits viable? And just to go back to the evidence we heard previously with regards to some of the union's concerns, I wondered specifically what experience of the council run facilities do you have of teachers being part of that and that actually being something they're really enjoying being part of and coming along on these trips as well?
I feel it's evident that teachers support this so much, because if they didn't support it, we wouldn't be sitting here, because it's the teacher's choice to come. So even though they are in very challenging times of making it equitable, teachers still make this happen. So they choose to do this. And I've always feel that when the teachers arrive, they turn up with glowing light, so they know what they're coming to. They're really excited by it. They don't come to the centres feeling, oh, I've been sent here. That I've not encountered that, and I've looked at my colleagues, that it's not something that, I've been forced to come here. That's not it. They're really looking forward to their week away. There are different designs and course design, and that's really important. I think that's a narrative again from last week that was to move away from. Course design is really important, and the Outbound and Frida will be able to talk about the course design that they do so well. But I would suggest that where the teacher leads experience in secondary, on field work, for example, or where there's specific parts. So I can talk about a young group who come away in residential from a secondary school in Edinburgh, and they are coming to enable their additional support needs within that group, and they're preparing these young people for the world of work. So it's coming away and just putting a work ethic where a work ethic doesn't exist where they come from. So with that, the teacher leads that experience and takes charge of that. And actually, we just drop in to do smaller parts of it. So I'm hoping that answers sort of showing there is a lot of evidence of these targeted course designs.
I'm happy to speak about that. So at Outbound, we work with 9 to 24-year-olds, so a really broad spectrum of young people. And the design would always start in a similar way, with the person sitting in front. If it was you, what matters to you most? What's happening with your young people in your constituencies? What things might they need? What experiences have they had? It's about the context of how we can deliver to make sure that we understand that common language and we build it. To give you kind of a clear understanding of how that might be framed around educational language or around the needs of young people, I thought to give you a few examples pinned on last week. So last week at Lochiel, so Lochiel is based on the West Coast. It is £2.7 million charity that rural economy-wise supports. It's got £1 million building project that's going on currently. Again, money going into local economy there. But the young people that were at Lochiel, 120 young people every week, that were a real mix. So we had a resettlement group, so unaccompanied asylum-seeking children from North Lanarkshire who were there. We had our Broth who were there with Christmas leavers. They were working on our Adventure and Challenge Award, which sits in the SCQF. So the SCQF being one of the ways in which we can help with that common language and that parity of esteem, so that we value all learners. Brave You Academy were there with young leaders looking towards a merger with Craigie and Dundee, and we were helping to build the young people to be leaders to help with that transition. And then as well as that, we had a wee group of young carers who were there as well to get to know one another better, have a bit of respite and time away. So how you design it is the same. You start with what matters to you. What's the context of learning? What things are you doing within, if it was a school, what's in your school improvement plan? How can we move things on for you? And build it from there and design it from there. I rarely talk about activities, which I know might surprise everyone when we're talking about canoeing and kayaking. I talk about learning. I talk about young people. I talk about what you want to get out of it, the experience. And that's the impact that you get at the end of the day.
Can I just ask a very brief question? In terms of making a visit viable, is your experience, and maybe for Ardroy, I don't know if you still have relationships with Fife Council in providing this, do you usually see for state sector teachers and pupils travelling on a Monday, for example, and then returning back to their local authority on a Friday? So actually the working week for a teacher would be still the same? Yeah, that's your answer.
Yes.
Okay. Easy answer. Thank you. Thanks, Camina.
Thank you. Just before we come to Bill Kidd, can I just ask about the Evolve system then? Why would authorities like Glasgow and Edinburgh, who clearly have outdoor education, not join that system? Is there a cost implication? Or?
It's a third-party piece of software. Edinburgh doesn't have it as yet. We've been trying to look at the costing for it for a long time, but we're thinking we're going towards it.
But on that, it is universal across Wales, every local authority in Wales?
Yes, it's been foreseen, and that is also done because there's a key element of safety management and the way that schools work in academy systems as well. So.
Could you provide us with the local authorities? Did you say there's 13 that use it?
I'd have to, I can work that out. I can provide that subsequently. Yeah.
Yes.
That'd be useful. Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Convener. I hate to have to continue to do this, but there's only a couple of wee questions, hopefully. What's the average costs for a school to attend an outdoor centre? How much would a school have to, or a local authority have to pay on behalf of that school?
Sure. The last round of AHOEC member centres, the price was £420 for the speaking on. Now, as I said, I mentioned before, some centres need to have tried, or they've had to come to a point where they think, if I don't include some of my capital cost, I won't be able to afford to be here next year. So they've needed to increase, and then some other areas have managed to target specific pieces of funding to reduce that price. So that's where we get our range of price.
So how many young people, how many pupils are we talking about in attendance for that £420 approximately? How many would be attending in a group?
Oh, so that would be down obviously to the capacity of the centre. So my own centre, on average, we're about 100 young people per week, sometimes down to sort of 60, sometimes up to 110 in a variety. And obviously, there across Scotland, we have centres which are more tailored towards outdoor recreation, which have much higher bed capacities. And run their centres in different ways. However, those centres are also AHOEC members, and they are very much on the journey to learning how to engage with learning for sustainability and other parts and try and become more high-quality outdoor learning providers. But it's definitely seen that the centres with a higher level of recreation focus have much higher bed numbers.
Right, and on that basis then, are there any of the outdoor centres, residential outdoor centres, are there any who are financially reliant on school visits, or is that gone now, as was suggested by Phil Thompson earlier? I think that
we are completely reliant on school visits. Yeah, we are completely reliant on school visits. Yeah, we find funding from other sources now. Because we're third sector, we can tap into some things that we couldn't if we were a local authority. But if you switched off the school tap tomorrow, we'd be out of business in a week.
Oh, see, right, okay, so it's a very important...
Absolutely.
Right, what's for the benefit of both sides then, actually, obviously, I mean, because the schools and the young people are benefiting greatly, but so also are the outdoor centres and keeping going. Frida, you got something to say?
I mean, our whole purpose of existing is an educational charity, so we exist as part of education. So actually, of course, if we turned off the tap, then we wouldn't exist as a charity anymore. But 80% of the young people who attend Outward Bound do receive some financial support from us as a charity. Right. So in Scotland, we raise £750,000 every year to support young people to come. And across the UK, that's £4 million. And that's not sustainable for everyone. No. So that's why we need it for more.
And I think if I could just add in as well, just to the same story, it kind of goes back to what Nick was saying earlier. Nobody's a millionaire here working in the third sector. If you want to make £1 million and you start with 2 million, is kind of the way it would work for us. But yeah, we're wholly reliant really on the school trade, and I think it's probably worth mentioning that during the COVID pandemic, then that for us almost closed us as an organisation, because the schools could no longer come. And we were very fortunate to get a little bit of funding from the government, and that just kept us going, just kept the wheels turning before we could start trading again. But if that hadn't been the case, then I certainly wouldn't be sitting here today representing my organisation.
That's something that I think people really need to sort of put their heads around, but that's very, very helpful and good answers, and thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Sonny, Nick.
No, I would just like to dive down. Obviously, it was myself. I was in the privilege at the time of assessing and asking for money in COVID, and without the $4 million from the Scottish Government, none of us would be here anymore. So it was, the Outdoor Education Service was fully reliant on the money that came for the exact reason you've asked, because without the schools coming, there is nothing else.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that. It's very helpful. Thank you.
John Mason.
Thanks, Convener. Building on what Bill Kidd's been asking about, so a young person comes, somebody's got to pay £420, which might be the parents or whoever. What costs would the young person have on top of that? Because it's been suggested, well, there'll be transports, I've got that. Do they have to bring any clothes with them, decent shoes, waterproofs, anything like that, or can they just turn up with just their ordinary clothes? I'll take Miss Fallon.
Sorry, Nick, I beg your pardon.
No, I'll talk big picture, and then wonderfully each I'll hand over to them to talk the
Question to Miss Fallon.
Oh,
we'll
sorry.
maybe go to Miss Fallon first. Sorry. Everyone's keen to get in. So.
I saw you nodding.
Thank you. And again, as an educational charity providing for all young people, we therefore have to provide for the needs of all young people. So when they arrive, they get a £2,000 worth of kit in a kit cage, including all their boots, waterproof camping kit, everything they need. If they're going to jump in the loch, we'll give them a second old pair of trainers that are there. So they need nothing apart from the clothes they stand up on, and we'll support them with the rest.
Okay, Mr March, is that the case across the board?
Absolutely. So we are now poverty proofing. Poverty proofing is our ethic with high quality outdoor learning centres. Each centre we put out a kit list that we know that kit lists provide anxiety to parents. We've got this as direct feedback, so our kit list has to be there that shows that a young person doesn't, and it says on the top of my kit list, do not go to any outdoor shop, do not go and buy anything, send them in their football stuff, their socks and stuff, and we will supply the waterproofs, the boots. I've even got lockers of all my second-hand leftover clothes that are washed, and I can hand out joggies and trainers to ensure that no child has to come with anything additional. Yeah.
Okay. That's helpful. Now, to move on to kind of capital funding, we've touched on that already. So I'll start with Mr Miller this time. I think I have stayed in 2 of your centres when I was younger. So
tell me you enjoyed them.
Absolutely, yes. Well, that's quite a long time ago. And that kind of leads on to the point that obviously some of your buildings are quite old.
Yep.
They have been there since 1939?
Yeah.
Yes.
They were designed for 25 years, and you know, here we are, still eking a living out of them 80 years later.
85 years later.
Yeah.
Okay, that's quite impressive. So can you give us an idea, I mean, what kind of state are they in? I mean, are they a really good state, or are you really needing money, capital spending, or where are we?
It's a little bit of a variable. They all look like they could do with a little bit of a polish. Some of the buildings, we apply for pockets of funding here and there from different trust funds, and that allows us to do our refurbishments. And it's a piece-by-piece basis. So by that, some of our buildings are in better condition than some of the others. We try and keep the living accommodation, the dormitories, all of a standard level, you know, a good, acceptable, warm level where people will get as much comfort as they need, which is not luxurious, but, you know, more than acceptable, I would like to hope.
Give us a picture. How big are the dormitories?
Our dorms are more traditional, so they all sleep 12. So we've got various different blocks, and in each block we have 4 dorms. Each dorm sleeps 12, plus a little internal unit for the visiting staff to stay as well, which is a little ensuite that they stay on their own.
Right. And where would the money come from if the capital cost is not coming with the fees? Where is it coming from?
It's from different trust funds. So just, you know, here and there, it's part of my job and the fundraiser from time to time as we look and we try and apply for different pockets of funds here and there for specific projects. And that might be to upgrade showers and toilets so that they're more acceptable for ASN young people, for example, or it might just be for general refurbishment, which we did recently to a main hall to give it better heating, lighting, and so on and so forth. And just,
but none of that's coming from the public sector?
No, absolutely not. No. Our fees to the young people or their parents or the sponsoring body merely covers the operational costs, nothing further.
Okay. And Ms Fallon, you said £1 million. Can you tell us, not detail, but roughly where that came from?
Again, we would fundraise to support young people to come specifically, and we have 7 different criteria for funding young people, but we also fundraise for capital. And so they're separate fundraising projects. And you can imagine that a project like a £1 million learning village that they're building at Lochiel can take years, and it has taken years to fundraise. So all that time that you're waiting, we had yurts in the grounds which are now slightly mouldy. So you're always waiting as you build that money up to be able to do these projects. But please come and visit. It finishes in January, and if you get the chance, I would love to host you because it is going to be phenomenal. So,
and you said Learning Village. Can you tell us what that is?
So Learning Village is probably not true. This is what I say to the centre, because our learning happens outdoors. So I don't like to call it that. I like to call it the Cayley Place, actually, because it's a meeting place. So every group that comes to Lochiel gets a clan name. And actually this space that we have built that's finishing in January is beautiful 5 kind of timber sweep of classrooms, effectively, where young people can get ready for going on activity, where they'll review the experience, and it's a space for them to be together. But in the middle of it is a massive fire pit where all 120 young people who are coming to Lochiel in any given week can meet and join and share in that community experience. Because at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's about living together, being together, sharing those stories of the things that have happened to you in the day that are developing you, that you can take back home. So, yeah.
So Mr March, is that the same really across the board?
Absolutely. Or
are there variations, or, I mean, are some in danger of closing because the capital situation is so dire?
Yes. So we've had a number of centres that have a crowdfunder currently out for doors and paint to be able to. They haven't been able to recover any capital costs through their price, simply because they have got such a good, strong ethic in keeping the prices low, because the young people that come to that centre come from very deprived places. So the biggest risk to any centre, as I said, is the building. If you can't look after the building, the centre closes. And the inclusion of, so from a local authority point of view, there's no capital investment in our space as well. So we're all encouraged now to go through traded service concepts in order to generate income through, for my own purpose, all of our lodges are for sale at weekends on various different platforms. So we generate income through that way, and that's what allows us, because, simple point, there's no capital cost.
Mr Thompson, I mean, do schools, when they're choosing which outdoor centre to go to, I mean, partly it's they've got a relationship with you, so they know you and they're comfortable, but how much is cost a factor, do you think?
It's not a massive factor. I think we are fortunate that because we were part of Fife Council, we still largely work with Fife schools. We have that long relationship that we've established over many years. Cost is certainly a factor. We recently had to put our costs up a little bit for the next 2 academic years, just to break even.
You want to give us a rough idea, percentage-wise, how much you've had to put them up?
By about 7% or so, not a lot. We had to set our prices 2 years ago, just at the end of the pandemic. Inflation has just gone rampant, as you know, since then. So we've had to make the hard decision to increase our prices by a bit. And just to sort of illustrate this, I'd like to read an email that I got from a teacher. It's very brief. I queried why they weren't booking with us. We're having to consider our options moving forward. It is getting harder and harder to ask the families to pay out for the cost of the week. We also provided so much for them last year: bedding, toiletries, hold-alls, and I'm not sure if we will have access to do this again this year. I have to discuss with my head teacher and the parents to get their thoughts. In honesty, and this is answering the accommodation thing, we are also finding your accommodation is becoming run down. Although everything else is fantastic value for money, instructors, equipment, etc., it is not the most pleasant dorms for the children to stay. So we can offer a high-quality product, but if our building is failing, we're failing as well.
Okay. And, I mean, just finally, anything else on the financial side or the financial memorandum that any of you want to comment on? No, that's fine.
Can I just quickly take in Jackie Dunbar here?
Yeah. Thank you. If I can ask a couple of supplementaries to Mr March, if you don't mind. You're speaking about the kit that's provided to every child and young person. So do all outdoor centres provide this?
No, they don't. I think it is the ambition of, I would suggest, the recent meeting of High Quality Outdoor Learning Framework just shows that everyone who were in a high quality ambition provided the kit and poverty proofed but it is not universal.
Okay. And does a child get to take it home? Sorry if I'm...
No, just a child. All of the... To be fair, anything that comes out of my seconds wardrobe, I always say it doesn't need to come back. Yeah. And often I don't want it back once it's been in the gorge. So, yes, so yeah. It's in the space.
I was just wanting for clarification. And if the bill does passes, will your kit... does that mean you'll need to provide more kits because there'll be more young people coming, or do you think you'll manage with what you've currently got?
The centres we've got that are providing kit won't need any more than we've already got. I think that a really important ingredient of this bill will be a quality mark, a quality framework to establish that we are getting value for what we do, and that I think is essential that the young person that is poverty proofed and that they supply the equipment.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Thank you. Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Convener. I was going to say good morning. Yep, we're still morning. Good morning, and thank you for your evidence so far. I want to kind of pick up a little bit on my colleague John Mason's points around the buildings, but also to go back to your earlier point, Ms Fallon, around pastoral care, and in specifically around the provision for pupils with additional support needs. So we've had evidence to the committee that says, so for example from PGL Travel Group, who've said the issue arises around the ability to house young people with more severe disabilities overnight. Facilities don't exist in enough numbers currently. And the Glasgow City Council said, take into account children with ASN who have complex needs and would require significant support, adaptations to centres, specialist equipment and beds, etc., as well as additional costs. So you get the picture. I'm just be really keen, and I should say this as someone who's been to outdoor residentials when I was at school, which was obviously only last week, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm pleased to hear that we're not, putting people in canoes now and seeing how they get on, because safe to say I didn't do well in my canoe. But it's just what is your response in general to the concerns around the reality of supporting the wide breadth of pupils that you would need to support?
I think that is a reality, and I think we all need to put the structures in place that we can have those conversations, that we can look at each individual and make sure that our provision is there, and that will be an ongoing journey as we work through this. My worry is that currently all young people don't come across my desk. I don't get to have that conversation. I don't get to see what I can do. And obviously the entitlement bill will change that. But I can share what we do currently and how we address it, which is probably relevant. We have, at the very initial stages, a participant form which is electronic. It's filled out by the family. Everything on there from they can only eat beige food to they need certain clothing, which we have. We have waterproof hijabs, for example, in our stores. There's specialist things that we already have because we're on that journey already. But within our participant form, that comes automatically into us. And we have a specialist medical screening team called the Adventure Applications team that look through all those forms. And then they'll either contact the family if they need more information. And then they write a plan for each individual young person that comes to our centre. And so that plan could be catering, it could be stores, like I'm saying, what you kit them up in. It could be anything to do with activities and how we'll change things. But we address that for everybody that comes. And so I think it's really important to say, for every 120 young people each week, say at Lochiel, we're doing that for all of them. So the inclusion piece for us is having that conversation as they come across my desk. And I would like them to come across my desk more, if I'm honest, if that's where I'm coming from with it. I know you had a wonderful quote. Go on.
I've got a story. Right? I'd like to introduce you to Nevis. Nevis has cerebral palsy. Nevis is a full-time wheelchair user and he needs support with feeding and an adult with him all the time. He came to us last year and he wrote this for me to share today. Rock climbing was awesome. I got to defy gravity and abseil down a mountain at the speed of light. Kayaking was so cool, literally. I sailed round an island with my school friends in a storm. I scored a gold at archery and we did drumming together at night and it was really exciting and fun. I've never done any of those things before and my teachers helped me. I can't do so many things like this at home because they don't have spaces for kids with wheelchairs to join in at many places. Or there are stairs I can't go into the building. I think every kid should get the chance to go on the residential, have adventures and hang out together. You get to do things that you only see in films and you never think a kid could do. It made me feel brave. I think Nevis is the reason I sit here most of my time at work. I think that every centre has a outlook to include every child in Scotland. There is a ceiling which none of us can pass through at the moment, I would suggest. It comes through that when we look at welfare and accommodation and overnight, that there is a certain level that we can't go beyond. And that's throughout Scotland, that we don't have that level of specific high-end need. And I think this lives without with the bill for me, this concept it needs, and lots of young people in Scotland need to travel down to England where there are centres that can cater at that really high level. Whereas I can look after Nevis as one child for 1 week, I couldn't look after 6 Nevis in 1 week. So we can look after it, and we do great things. And we have a visionary in Equal Adventure, an organisation who's looking to expand SEN in every outdoor centre. So we're supported.
Can I just ask on that then? So, and that's a great story, and actually it's reflective of my experience of it as well. So, it really is incredibly important, absolutely. And local places don't always give that support to children and young people, so it's crucial. What is the ceiling, and what would you need to break it?
Does anyone? I can keep talking, but I can leave it. I believe that the ceiling. So I recently visited an outdoor centre in Derbyshire. And Derbyshire was a local education authority centre, and it had invested in a key building. And that building was fully equipped to look after and work with high-end special educational needs schools with a wide range of needs that needed welfare, and it had everything that needed to look after sleep, hoist, shower, wash, everything. It had capital investment, but that had enabled that site to become fully inclusive. And I think if for my part, the vision of Equal Adventure is to not just have a special outdoor education centre, but to have every centre that can include every child, so they can go on the journey with their school friends. So that's where, to break it, we need to be able to invest in that.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And just one more question for yourself, I'm sorry, because the story was so compelling. Can you remember, or do you know, or do you have a view on who pays for the person to support Nevis, for example?
It was done in partnership. The school had to get some money from the local education authority's SEN team. We had to ask, the parent had to pay some additional funds, for sure. And we as a centre, because we felt, I don't like the word obligation because it feels like you're forced. We wanted to make sure that that young person came, and we funded all the additional equipment. We chose to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Willie Rennie.
So, a lot of this comes down to money, but money and priorities. And you've heard there's a lot going on in Scottish education, real challenges. You'll have seen it firsthand yourself. But what I'd be intrigued in is you've got some money from some foundations and charities and so on. Do you think this bill might open up further opportunities to release money from those charities by the fact that it's law? Would that trigger more investment from elsewhere, do you think? Or will all of this have to come from the state?
I think it's probably a little bit of both, to be honest. From my perspective, our organisation is very seasonal. So if this bill was to go through, then what that would do is effectively open up our calendar to the shoulder months as well, where traditionally people may not choose to come, although you can still get really good, high-quality learning through the non-traditional months, let's say. So from that perspective, that would give us extra revenue in to invest back, and probably we would work through a little bit of economies of scale, and that would be really helpful to us. But trust funds are also looking at the impact, the overall impact, their bang for their buck, for want of a better expression. So if we were working with more young people, I would suggest that some of the trust funds would be also more available to give forth some of their money for some of these projects. And the projects would have to meet the specific needs that the young people are needing, and also matches up with the wants and the needs of that particular trust fund. So I think it's probably a little bit of both.
Okay. Anybody else? Go on.
I believe, I'm hoping that this would change the narrative and understanding of what an outdoor centre now does and what it contributes to the school and to society. And I think when looking at the budget of this, I'm hoping that it can be looked at with the education budget, because I believe that the benefit and the value of this experience to a young person has knock-on effects throughout their lifetime about the choices they make and the directions they go in. And I would really hope that the engagement with funders and private sector could help to unlock some of the other barriers in terms of capital investment.
I would make the observation that if in 1970 we had over 70 local education centres in Scotland, now we're down to 9. What happened? How did we get here? And now more than 50% of the beds in Scotland are being maintained by the third sector, who are doing it at rock bottom, the best we can, just about making do, not spending capital investment. We're almost approaching a tipping point as an industry where if there isn't some serious investment soon, then we collectively are in trouble. Or the flip side is we put our costs up so much that it starts to become unattainable and unreachable for sectors of the community. Or our model in Ardroy is to have relatively cheap prices in December, January, February, so schools from really deprived areas can just about manage to attend. The prices go up a little bit in the summer months, and that way we can operate a year-round model. But the key thing, and I don't have the answer to this, is how did we get here? How did we go from, in the 70s, nearly every local education authority had an outdoor education centre, now they're like dinosaurs. How do we turn that round?
I was going to say, when I think about this, I think about it perhaps like 5 a day for health and well-being. You know, it's an upstream intervention that can have such huge ramifications for the young person, the educator and society. And in some ways, there's so many government agendas that we would hit if you started to read it through the eyes of this. As an entitlement. So you've got the Promise Fund, you've got the transition to net zero and the investment in farming and the blue economy and health, you've got active travel, you've got funding Scotland's rural economy, you've got PEF, you've got learning for sustainability, we've got, I could go on, I've got it here, but behaviour in Scottish schools. I've got a massive list of ways in which, in the same way I would at the school, connect what I do to what's going on for them. I'm connecting what I do with what's going on for you. And I think I could have been sitting in a different committee today. I could have been sitting in rural skills or a skills committee, but I'm sitting with you in education, and I just wonder, does it all have to come from education? I don't think so. Could we look across the whole portfolio and see how a sector in an amazing country like Scotland, why do we not take our young people out and experience all of Scotland and inspire them with the places that we all live? And I think we should be.
So the scope then of this, I mean, should it be for 5 to 17, and how much would you have to increase your capacity by in order to meet that group? Have you done the sums about how much you would need?
The bed spaces, when I speak to AO8 members in the capital sector, they simply, in private sector, sorry, they simply say, if this is it, we will build more beds. So the beds don't actually, and the capacity of bed spaces don't worry members in the private sector. Obviously, it comes definitely down to the third sector, and local authorities would need to approach that in a different way. The challenge would be, we would need an implementation plan, and that's a strong piece of advice from our board. We would need a staged approach to implementation of this bill to allow us to build capacity, and the biggest capacity would be in staff, in qualified, which we touched on earlier, about staff that could provide this high quality mark that would be needed.
Okay, that's fine. Nobody else?
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you. The bill is proposing that the residential outdoor education course should be at least 4 overnight stays and 5 days, but it doesn't need to be all together. Can I ask all of your views on if you think it should be all together or not? I'll start with Phil and come along the...
Absolutely. It's a unique, immersive, impactful experience. Going away for 5 days, I can think of children who we work with who have never left their local area, and to get on a bus and to travel across Scotland and to come up over the rest and be thankful and arrive down in Loch Goilhead, their jaws are on the floor. They've never seen something like that before. I know a 16-year-old lad who was given the opportunity to go to Fort William on an outward bound residential, and it changed his life He's me. So the ability to take children away for 5 days, to have that sort of recurring. And the other thing is that the learning that you can condense into those 5 days is incredible. If you do it in a more piecemeal manner, you don't achieve that. The same instructor, this is the same for all of our organisations, same instructor works all the way through from Monday to Friday with that child. They build up a relationship, they go through a sequence of challenges, and it's just the most incredible, immersive, memorable experience that they will have.
Okay. Nick, your views?
Absolutely. The 5 days is a really balanced point, a sort of day 3 phenomena of what happens when a child, all of a sudden on the Wednesday, we often call it Weepy Wednesday, in that all of a sudden the emotions pour out and everything's, oh, help. But there's a point where the removal from their space and trying to reevaluate, we get so much feedback from children. It was in these days, especially on the Thursday, that they felt that this was the time they managed to sort of reevaluate a lot of the things they took home. And parents come home, and I'd love to be able to say they took a new look on the world, but a lot of the feedback I get from parents, they came home and they made their bed. This was amazing. What have you done? So that happens, that impact on a child happens in that 5 days. I want to put a caveat in though. We have so many additional support needs in Scotland of anxiety and neurodiversity, and there are a lot of young people there that this 5 days is too much, and we all recognise that. We build programmes that are targeted, so a lot of times we build social stories, and the young person may only come up for 1 or 2 days, and the teachers support that process for that learner because they know that just that is going to have enough impact for them. So whilst I'm strongly at 5 days, for some young people, we will need to build tailored programmes to suit them.
Okay. My dad always said to me, if you make your bed every day, then if you do nothing else, you've completed one task.
Completed one task, absolutely.
Rita, I still make my bed every morning.
So you're speaking to obviously the bias here. We think the more, the better. You know, the longer, the more you're in the outdoors, the whole spectrum of progressive, meaningful experiences to quality outdoor learning. So the residential within that, absolutely, 5 days as a minimum would be great. Totally acknowledge what Nick says, flexibility within that to make sure that everyone gets that opportunity. And if that young person, like I was saying there before, if there's a barrier to that, we need to address it. And if that's shorter time, so they still get the experience, I think that's important. I just wanted to read a quote from a young lad in Fife. We're talking about the parent there and the impact on the parent and what you get back after that 5 days. And this always gets me, so I'll try my best. But he says, this is from parent, I can't believe what this residential has done for him. His routine is totally flipped. And he said you really listened and understood that when things were too much. You didn't push him too far, and you gave him that extra bit of time. I feel like I actually have my son back. Thanks so much for taking a chance with him. His sleep was so bad before, and he had no quality of life. I can't mind the last time he got up for school, and ever since he's been back, he's been up every morning. You gave me a chance to make memories with my son and for him to build a future for himself, and I couldn't be prouder of him. So that's a parent. And it's that catalyst. It is only 5 days, and the reason I read that is because I go, it's only 5 days, but it isn't. By the time you've taken in the design, the 5 days is framed within a context of learning that is much broader. So there's work before, there's work after. It becomes so much more than 5 days. And I sat here in Holyrood with a young lad who was deputy head at Liberton, and he described just that. He went on his first residential in S1, and it was a catalyst for him to take on other opportunities that were offered to him in the school. And he didn't speak to anyone, he said, when he entered S1. He didn't have very good English, he said, when he started. And by the time he was in S6, he was sitting there as deputy head boy, because the catalyst of coming to Outward Bound had enabled him to have the confidence to take on other challenges. And I think the residential benefits can be hidden by that in some ways. You know, these young people develop and take on other opportunities, and you don't see that the impact might have been just that one thing that happened as a catalyst. And so I think if you frame it within the catalyst and things like that, like getting up for school, that boy will develop now more than ever because of that, which is great.
Yeah, there's a transition that happens really between being coached and being more self-efficacious, if you like, or self-efficacy. And as you transit from, let's say, the Monday through to Friday, then the level of challenge just changes throughout that time. So our tutors, same as the other high-quality providers, will guide the person at the first day tends to be very on hand, and then as you transit through towards the Friday, actually there's a lot of the empowerment and the design of the course gets handed over to the young people, and you can see that happening as a member of staff working with the groups. They become much more independent between those two periods of time. So again, all that can get immediately transferred back into their work, back into their classroom and back into their own lives back at home. So it isn't just, as Frida says, it's not just 5 days, it is what happens before, it's that co-design of the course, and it's the wash up and what happens back and the learning transfer back in the real life. But I would say yes, 5 days is quite a good minimum to get a good impact from these courses.
Yeah, 5 days together is what I think you guys are lobbying for wherever possible.
Yeah, and a lot of the learning happens socially as well, so that's why the residential component of these courses is quite important. So rather they're not 5 individual days that just kind of happen, they are 5 concentrated days, and then there's a lot of social learning that happens just in the free time, in the chit-chat, in the things that happens over meal times, in the dormitories, in the tents, you know, all that kind of thing, and that adds to the experience.
Okay, thank you.
We heard last week that potentially the benefits plateau after about 5 days. Do you think if you go much beyond that, the benefits don't continue to increase?
I'm not sure about that, really, and I don't have any hard and fast evidence. I've certainly worked some programmes, in fact, regularly when I worked for Outward Bound, both here and overseas. I would work for 21 days with groups, and you would see, you know, you could work on lots of different personal development projects within that time. So I'm not sure about that, really. I've found that the more contact time, the more the development.
Okay. George Adam.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad you're telling me that it's more than just kayaking, bows and arrows and running about the place, because that was some of the evidence that we got from 2 of the individuals, particularly last week, which came across as if it hadn't changed since the days I was there, and unlike Pam, well, it wasn't yesterday for me. But it's interesting from the perspective, you know, I think it was Nick, you said about there's a difference between outdoor education and outdoor recreation. And I'd be interested in actually finding out more about that. You know, how do you actually make that distinction? Because you've already said now evidence that most of the highest capacity of beds are recreational more than anything else. So how many young people are getting access to the outdoor education? How do you package that for the individual and the group at the same time? That's quite a lot, but...
No, sure. If I design the sort of... I'm really glad to have made that distinction last week, because I was sitting there last week going, that's not who we are anymore. Right. So that's really important. And I'm going to invite some of them to come to a centre. A really good high-quality learning package now starts, as Frida's really said, about the design and the walk-in, and the instructor being engaged with the class teacher beforehand and enabling the teacher. That relationship's really, really important. In the week that they're there, the instructor stays and designs the programme in that week. That level of personalisation and individualisation is what restricts, I would suggest, you know, the programme, because lots of big high-capacity centres don't have the ability to have that level of individualisation. If you have 450 learners on site, you need to have a very organised jigsaw of how they're moving around. The recent, I visited the biggest high-capacity centre about a month ago. I met with the director, and they see the direction, and they have been inspired by the Curriculum for Excellence Outdoor Learning Outcomes and Learning for Sustainability, and have volunteered that they very much now want to go on that journey to see how they transition into this model. I will need to put that's an unknown how we're going to do that yet for a centre of that capacity.
But of course that kind of changeover again gets us back into the financial realm, where there's going to be quite a outgoing for yourselves, and how does that get financed again?
I would suggest that within the third sector and the high-quality outdoor learning providers like my own centre, we're already there. I think the biggest transition to the high-quality model would need to come from some of the high-capacity private sector centres. And they are not intimidated by the capital investment that would be needed towards that. They have volunteered that if the bill came in and the quality high quality framework came into practice, that they would raise their game, as it were, to meet that challenge.
Okay, and just to ask Frida, you've been talking about at length on how when you know someone's coming, you go to the school, you work out the programme. You know, does that happen to every child? Because that could be quite challenging, I would think, because it'd be like a jigsaw. you know, because you'd be trying to kind of ensure you may have children with additional support needs, or more than one nowadays, you know, and at the same time you've got to make sure you cater for the whole class, or the whole group. So how do you manage to do that, and how practical is that to do that for just about every pupil that's getting involved in all this?
It's great, can I just say? That's what I love about my job. You know,
that kind of comes across, Frida.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I love it. I think the best conversations are about how we can. They're all everyone's part of our society, so they should be valued as such. So, yeah, it's not a bother, is what I'd probably say. And if they're all at the centre at the same time, they're part of our community too.
But I'm saying if this becomes part of the statutory requirement, and we're doing that across the board, so that every child gets an opportunity, how feasible is that to actually be able to do that, to give that kind of focus?
Yeah, and I suppose within Outer Bound, they have someone in my role who works in partnership with educators to address some of those concerns and speak with people, and that is a role which exists, and I suppose we would all need to have that dedicated role to have those conversations, which we all do within the high quality. So I think it's just making sure that the provision, if everyone comes across our desk, then it's the provision can match it, and that's the journey we're going to have to go on. And which we all want to work with you on, because I think that's our job, that's our responsibility. It's not to say that that becomes a barrier, because this is our society. It's saying, how can we address it together? And I think it will be straightforward, as my conversations are not. They can be challenging, but then that's what we're up for. That's what we're here for.
We're an industry that thrives on challenge, you know. And if the challenge to say we now need to have more high quality,
well, I can see how Phil has. He's got buildings that are in there since 1939.
No, that's Jamie actually.
Oh, it's Jamie. Sorry, Jamie.
1969.
No.
Oh, your buildings are as old as me. So
Likewise.
So, Jamie, just on that point, on the fact that the capital spend, everyone said the capital spend could be the thing that either makes or breaks a centre. You've got the older kind of buildings. How do you see that? Should this become, again, how do you deal with the capacity that ends up coming at your doorstep expecting should this bill go through? You know, because that becomes a challenge for you again.
Yeah, it does. And again, we've got a few plans within our organisation about how we can, you know, develop, and we're also at a transitional phase. So if we get extra funding, then what we might start doing is rather than retrofitting buildings, we might rebuild buildings, because it's just starting to get to that point. I think some of the villages that live near our outdoor centres benefit from a little waft of warm air that comes down, you know, through the lack of insulation and so on and so forth of our aged buildings. So it's a perennial problem looking after old buildings that were never designed with efficiency in mind. And I think the third sector, or most outdoor centres really, they inhabit buildings that nobody else wants, and that's how they exist. So, yes, I think through extra capacity and through extra funding, then we can make that transition into a more sustainable, long-term, better quality experience for everybody and the young people.
And again, where do you see that funding coming from? Would that be a mishmash or a basket of measures?
I think as I said in the previous question, I think we will benefit from economies of scale through this, and I think we'll also be more attractive to other funding bodies to ultimately rebuild some of our centres.
Okay, and do you have similar issues, Phil? Or?
Yeah. Capital is our nemesis. It's we can service the need, we can have children coming through, but for example, one of the main building of Our Joy was built in 1880. We've had to get a loan out to put a new roof on it, for example. We have a block called Heron Block, which is now 55 years old, which was actually referenced in that email that I read to you. So yeah, it is the biggest problem that we face. And just with your mention of quality, there is process going on. We're working now on a quality framework across the piece, so that we will be able to assess and establish that we are delivering a quality product. But yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Ross Greer.
Thanks, Convener. I'd like to ask about how your centres are inspected and assessed, but just before that, I want to follow up just on one of the points around financial viability. And Nick, the example you gave of Blairvaddock, which is in my area, as you pointed out, it's pretty much fully booked, kind of 48, 49 weeks of the year. But most years, Glasgow City Council still considers closing it because it's quite a significant net financial liability for them. And the tension there is, if they were to reduce the number of their own school trips that they brought in and increase the number of commercial bookings, they might move towards viability there. But that defeats the core purpose of why they have that centre in the first place. If we are to pass this bill and obviously really significantly increase demand from local authorities and schools for these class trips, how do we address that kind of tension where you've got centres like Blair Vaddock who may move towards financial viability, but only if they actually decrease the number of school trips they've got coming in and move into more of a commercial setting?
The key for this, for me, lies in the value of how much, for this example, the City of Glasgow value the experience and the value to the child. And every time that we look at having to close down a local authority centre, the teachers come up and say, please don't close this. The value to the child here is key. The really important bit about the Glasgow Centre, though, is how it makes it more affordable and the reduced price to every child who comes on that trip in Glasgow, which is really key. And the local authority allows that equity. And the big part of this bill, again, is about equity for young people. I think that I would hope that local authorities who may go back and just look to support this process and value, and that there's some momentum built through this. I myself have had connecting from 3 local authorities who don't have their own outdoor centre, but are now looking into what would we do if the bill came through. But I really would like to look at Aberdeenshire, who have just opened their new and across party recently came and presented an inspired story of why they valued it and how they chose to do it and the accessibility to the children of Aberdeenshire through this. So I think it's a conscious choice based on priority and value, and I believe that it's worth it.
That's great, thanks very much. And on to my core questions set around inspections and how you're assessed. I'm interested both here in the kind of basics of safeguarding inspections, things like that, but also how the educational outcomes of the services you provide are assessed, because the wider context for this bill is it's taking place at the same time as quite a lot of reform in the system. The government's education reform bill that will re-establish the independent inspectorate. So there's a discussion taking place about how wide its remit is. If you could just tell us a little bit about how you're currently inspected and assessed, both on safeguarding but also educational outcomes, and what changes you think might have to be made if we pass this bill and move this on to more of a statutory footing.
We are in a very exciting time. We are working, as you probably heard, many references to the new quality framework that's been designed. It's being done in association with the curriculum colleagues, not the Inspectorate of Education Scotland. And it is being done with teachers and we brought outdoor professionals in from across for a 25 described as a mega bubble to try and come up with this idea. Because at the moment there isn't anything of that standard, but it's there and it's going to come for Scotland, and it's a very exciting time for it. There is licensing. Licensing is still with us post awful Lyme Bay tragedy, and so the inspectorate still come in to look at the health and safety licensing process for all, and I must stress, licensable activities. So there are many activities that do not fall within licensing, so we may need to look at how we look at non-licensable activities if we put this framework in terms of health and safety.
Thanks very much.
I will add that yes, there are all those safeguarding, ALA, etc. in place. But if we weren't delivering a quality product, schools wouldn't be coming back to us. The head teacher and the teacher is actually the customer, because they are the people who decide to book again the following year. If we're not delivering a quality product, they will go elsewhere. We have had a number of schools coming in from other providers where they felt that they weren't getting what they wanted. They've come to us because they know that they're going to get a quality educational product. And the ultimate gatekeeper, if you like, is the parent stroke the teacher who's making that decision whether they want to come back to us or not for the following year.
So I've no doubt that's true, and when I'm not in here, I am a youth worker, and plenty of experience of young people I've worked with have had excellent experiences. If we were to take the cynical or pessimistic approach, if we pass this bill, we're going to significantly increase demand. There's a capacity issue. So at the moment, schools can be somewhat selective. They can go somewhere they know they're going to be happy with. If we end up in a situation where the schools are obligated to go somewhere and there's capacity issues in the system, options may be limited, and therefore they may end up going somewhere where they're not necessarily completely satisfied about the positives of the outcomes, which is why I'm asking around what kind of systems we would need in place to make sure, if we're increasing demand, capacity is going to have to be created to meet that demand. We need to make sure the capacity of the new expanded system matches the standards that you're all that I have no doubt that you're all meeting at the moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that would be a decision for government, because obviously if government is putting money into the industry, then it is entirely within its rights to say, OK, what value are we getting for money? And we would welcome any form of inspection so that we if nothing else, it would help to weed out the people who are not doing the job properly. And yeah, we would welcome that. Bring it on. You know, come and see, talk to us.
Thanks very much. Frida?
And I was going to say, I remember in my MSc in outdoor education here at Edinburgh, learning something like the outdoor industry is as regulated as the nuclear industry or something. So in terms of scrutiny, I think we're very, very used to it. But as a charity, I was going to say, we also have to report to our funders. So we have to understand our work, understand our contribution to society, and be able to report back on how their money was spent. And I expect no different in this, whether that's through inspection from an education point of view, people coming, how good is your school, you know, how good is your centre, that would be absolutely fine. Whatever frameworks you deemed needed to be put in place to make sure that a residential experience is quality, I think we'd want to, there's stuff in the, you know, our social impact report or reports on our work in Scotland, which I can share with you all. It exists and we're doing it already, so how do we expand that to incorporate it for everyone? So I understand the question.
Thanks very much. Jamie, have you got anything to add on that point?
Yeah, and similarly, really, all our products are, all our learning, rather, that takes place at the centres, you know, we link that directly back to the Curriculum for Excellence, Learning for Sustainability, and we take cognizance of GIRFEC, for example, as well as the United Nations for the Rights of the Child. So everything that we do is embedded into what government and what education requires of a good, high-quality provider. So absolutely, we're there to be measured and assessed on that output.
Great, thanks. Oh, sorry, Nick.
It's really essential that an implementation plan would be essential.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Next convener.
Okay, Miles, you want to come back in?
Yeah, just in the course of giving your evidence, I wondered if you could provide the committee with examples of where the Scottish Government are currently funding residential projects. I think the whole committee will be aware of Scottish Young Carers Festival, which is funded by Scottish Government, which is a 3-day residential for young carers. I think last year 500 young carers from across Scotland took part in that. So just wondering, in terms of where Scottish Government are already funding some of these residential projects, not through school, but through individual groups. If you don't have any of that, you can maybe write in to us.
Yeah, certainly the Young Carers Festival used to take place at Broomlea Centre for a number of years, and I think the funding dropped, and I think last year the Scouts at Fordall Firs. Yep. And we're talking to them just now, actually, about perhaps rehousing them again for this coming season. So, other than that, I'm not aware of other projects from Scottish Government that have been funded that come to us.
We have one specialist project that is run by a Glasgow-based team that runs across the Central Belt. It's been running for 27 years. It's called the Mark Scott Award, and some of you will definitely be aware of it. I know some will have been at project forums for that, and a portion of the funding, that's fully funded for everyone that takes part, and there's 150 young people every year. It starts with a residential, it's for S6 pupils. The whole idea behind it is about bringing together people from different communities, so different communities coming together, doing a residential, learning leadership skills, but then putting those leadership skills back into practice in their school communities. An essential element for that is the putting it back into your local communities and the young people working together from all different religious, cultural and socio-economic backgrounds. And the projects are amazing, from food poverty to mental health to first aid training, care homes to young people in primaries. If you get a chance to come to the project forums or any of those, you're again welcome. There's lots in your constituencies I can see as well. But that is community safety is the element of Scottish Government that comes from, and absolutely hits that. One thing I would say that is an add-on for this year for that project is that has had a pilot funding from the Learning for Sustainability Fund, and the pilot funding is a small amount to have it credit rated on the SCQF. So, as a Learning for Sustainability project, because so many of the elements of the community projects that does hits upon social justice, and it's all about the values of the young people coming together. And it's not led by us, any of the projects at all. The young people decide on the projects, they lead on the projects, they champion the projects, everything from councillors in North Lanarkshire doing an underpass, you name it. So yeah, that's a very valuable project that has been going a long time with clear outcomes.
Can I ask, towards the end of our earlier session, Tara Lillis was speaking about the increase in violence within schools and particularly difficult behaviour. Are there students who you refuse to take or currently can't take because of issues that they have in the classroom? We've spoken about ESN and disabilities, but what about violent pupils?
And it's a really common part to build with every teacher about a pupil. So we now have great relationships. We work with the teacher set, and they will highlight very early on any concerns. However, there's, from my point of view, and I'll speak instead of from my work from my time in Edinburgh, a teacher will always go, I think residential is the solution here. And they will really put lots of measures in place to allow that child to come along, because they see it is hopefully the thing that will transform them and open the door to stop this behaviour. I will suggest, though, and I have experienced where a child with really significant violent disruption within the class, it does not come along. And the teachers just feel that the risk threshold, we can't put a place in there. So whilst we always have a can-do and really good connection with the teachers now, there are there are one or two instances, I would suggest, where young people don't.
We've seen certainly reports of violence in the classroom increasing. Are you seeing a similar increase in the numbers that you have to take that decision on, or is it such a small number it's remaining static?
The level of work I now do with every group coming in with the variety, the spectrum of additional need has increased. And from the pandemic has gone through the roof. Mm-hmm. So the lead instructors now are working day in, day out, working with levels of anxiety, levels of neurodiversity, and massively on disruptive children.
So sorry, I suppose the question I'm asking is, has the number increased?
Yes.
So the number that you just cannot take for safety reasons,
no.
That's what I'm asking?
No, that has not.
Okay.
That's still a very, very small proportion, and it's one or twos. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a rule in teaching: don't challenge the behaviour, challenge the cause. Why is that child not behaving well? Is it because they're not? Is it because the classroom's not the right place for them? There are a huge number of dyslexics in my industry. They were the people sitting at the back of the classroom going, oh, but they found their vocation by going outside and by experiencing the natural environment and so on. So we never get tired of teachers telling us that that's not the child back in school. There's another thing within teaching, catch them being good. So if you can take them out of the classroom, have a positive experience, build up relationships with them, then that can be a real catalyst when they go back to school. And that, I suppose, also shows why teachers should attend. Teachers should go there. Chris Loynes called it, we saw Miss in Our Pyjamas effect last week. It's a kind of a levelling experience that everybody sees. So if we can provide a positive experience, build a relationship between a teacher and a child, take that back into the classroom, then it's a winner.
Any other examples that you want to?
Actually, the quote that I read out from the parent was a non-attending young person.
Yeah.
So it was just as you described. But I always think it's got to be the right, and we're a sector with vast differences in provision. Lochiel, we're limited by the fact it's 120 young people, I would say. So for some young people, that busyness might not be appropriate. So actually, it's about having that honest conversation and making sure that my provision is the right provision for you. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
I think as well, it depends what else is happening at the centre. You know, what the other bookings are, what the other groups are looking like, what the other young people are like. So it's a risk assessment like any other, really. So it's difficult to say, give you a hard and fast answer to that, but it would be that conversation. What's best for the young people, what's best for that young person, and what's best for the wider environment.
Yeah. Good. Well, on behalf of the committee, can I thank you all for your evidence today? Phil, you said at the start that we didn't have or we haven't had so far many voices of the young people. I think you've been able to articulate in your testimonies, be it Nevis, be it parents, be it teachers. That's been extremely useful to get that on the record, and we're then able to use it in our considerations. We have, however, had a number of submissions from young people to our call to evidence higher than most of the other calls for evidence that we put out. So that matches what you've been saying today is what we've already had from young people who are very impressed with what they receive when they go. So thank you very much for your time today and for your evidence, and I will suspend the committee for 15 minutes. Thank you.